In a world where war is raging and cold blades reflect in the sun, there lived a girl who got married for the first time at the age of 5 and still had many shocks to endure. The man clenched his fist, which was covered in blood, his white uniform stained with the viscous liquid, and he, barely maintaining his composure, reminded Agatha that he was not like her ex-husbands. Tired, exhausted eyes looked at him. A voice quietly asked if he still kept her close because he needed her. Her hands trembled, her fingers held the blade. Agatha asked next, or maybe it was because she was noblesse. The man's lips parted and the words escaped his lips. The bright purple eyes, reminiscent of amethyst, which shone even more on the pale face covered in blood, opened wide. In this chaos, next to the dead bodies of soldiers, broken glass, and cold floor, the girl asked him to repeat what he had just said. The man loosened his grip on the handle and said that he was not sure if he had the right to do this now. The hand unclenched, and the cold blade clanged against the cold floor. Agatha's husband said that he would still take advantage of the moment and sentence her family. Surprise was reflected in the amethyst eyes, the lips froze in silence. The man extended his hand to his wife and asked her to lower the dagger and come to him, not to make people worry, not to stand alone on the sidelines. The Nobilis family was the heart of the Roxbad Empire. They held untold wealth and power in their hands, and the name of the house was heard even beyond the borders of the empire. And in this house the only heiress was born, with light, sunny hair, snow-white skin, and equally light eyelashes, whose name was Agatha Nobilis. The history of her marriages was quite curious. The first, for example, happened when she was only 5. Then the girl was orphaned, and by the will of her godfather, the emperor, she became the wife of Duke Progus. It was a union of convenience. He was 30 years her senior, and over a glass of expensive cognac in a pub, his friend joked that she had 10 years left before she came of age, but that didn't bother him, because she was a gold mine. But the Duke was waylaid in a gambling house, and a knife blow left him crippled. This marriage collapsed and was replaced by a second one when Agatha turned 10. The emperor again decided to use the girl. Due to the emperor's claim to the throne of Ménacourt, she was married to the second prince of the Ménacourt Empire. His name was Fernand Menoconti. He was handsome and young, but depraved to the extreme. And later, his illegitimate children also surfaced. When Agatha was only 13, she asked for a divorce, and her second marriage also fell apart. The third marriage occurred when the emperor unleashed another war, having set his sights on a new port. The girl married the best knight of the empire, George Portus, but he was so insecure about his appearance that he was simply consumed by complexes. As soon as someone looked at him the wrong way, he would fly into a rage and shout, "Why are they staring at him? They think he doesn't know that they find it funny to look at a freak." He was in constant conflict with Agatha, and after the defeat in the war, they immediately divorced, and now the long-awaited coming of age has arrived. The 16-year-old girl decided that from now on she would choose her own husband. She thanked her godfather for what he had done for her up to now. His Majesty looked tense but did not contradict his goddaughter and told her to do as she saw fit. But on one condition: if there is a need, he will intervene, since the Nobilis house is important. 11 years passed before Agatha herself received the right to decide whom to marry, but as soon as the emperor's protection weakened, relatives who wanted to seize power tried to eliminate her. So the girl was forced to urgently choose a new husband for herself. The fourth marriage was the first in which she chose a man for herself. Henry Insidio was affectionate and courteous. But one day, when she was going to him to give him a newspaper, she heard his friend ask if Henry really loved Agatha Nobilis. This man, who replied that of course let her give birth, and then we can get rid of him, seemed to have been replaced. He, with an impudent face, freely said that as the guardian of the heir of the Nobilis family, he would take power into his own hands. Agatha froze. She didn't make a sound. Only the newspaper went limp in her fingers, because the rose-colored glasses fell off. Behind the facade of beautiful words, greed was hiding, and the girl abandoned Henry. The fifth marriage was a political alliance with the one who was supposed to become the girl's sword, Leonard Shingeri. Family life seemed smooth, without drama. But soon the doctor reported that the man had congenital impotence, which caused indignation in His Majesty, because this meant a fatal problem for the dynasty. He could not have children. The emperor furiously ordered Agatha to divorce immediately, otherwise the inheritance might fall into the wrong hands, so this marriage also collapsed. Then, for the first time, the heroine seriously thought that if she married someone who had everything, at least they wouldn't kill her. So, for the 6th time, she married the young heir of the ducal house of Nuta, Theodore Nuta. Their family was famous for its knights and impeccable manners. But even here there were some cracks, and Agatha, who lived in the Duke's residence, decided to put everything in its place. It was an ordinary sunny day. A girl was walking down the corridor. Her posture was straight, which emphasized her status. Her step was swift, and her hand was clenched into a fist. Agatha burst into her husband's office without knocking. At that moment he was busy with documents. He looked up and asked his wife in surprise what had happened. This lady, as he called her, abruptly placed her palms on the table and leaned forward. She quickly blurted out that she wasn't going to take it anymore, but Theodore had no idea what she was talking about. Agatha demanded that her husband immediately send his grandmother, mother, and sister out of the house so that they could live separately. The man took off his glasses. He became agitated and wanted to object, but the girl interrupted him, telling him to answer seriously, because his answer will determine whether this will be her last request. The husband asked with concern whether the family had done something wrong again, and Agatha immediately clarified that this was his answer. Theodore, with wide eyes and excitement, asked if they hadn't dealt with it before. She had come so suddenly, he was confused, but the girl raised her hand, making it clear that she didn't want to hear it. Agatha had been patient all this time, trying hard after all. This was her husband's family, but now she decided that she had had enough. Theodore's relatives were constantly picking on her. Agatha experienced contemptuous looks and listened to comments that her dress was vulgar. What can you expect from a woman who had been divorced 5 times? For them, she remained a daughter-in-law with a stain. She was accused of the fact that the noblest family did not want to divide the lands. That was the problem. Theodore wondered why his wife had remained silent before if things were so bad, but he understood that even her patience was not infinite. While she stood in front of her husband, waiting for at least some proposals to solve the problem, he suddenly suggested sending her relatives away. Agatha called her husband by name. He looked at her in confusion. The girl, with a smile on her face without any scandals or shouting, calmly suggested a divorce. Theodore turned pale. Thus ended the 6th divorce of Agatha, the main heiress of the Roxbad Empire. 2 months passed. The nobilis mansion, with its vast territory, columns, and pleasant, light-colored facade, glowed in the sun. Lady Agatha held a tea party, during which the ladies told her about men. It was Enoch Arrett's turn. He was the young head of the Arata house, the hero of the recent parade. This man suppressed the war at the age of 20, and he became a living legend of the continent, celebrated not only for his appearance and skills. The girls talked about rumors that he kicked out all his relatives when he returned from the front, and carried out a so-called purge, which all the nobility was talking about. Agatha smiled and said that Marquis Arata had intervened in time. Then he had covered up the failure of her 3rd husband, and now he had also diverted attention after the divorce. The girls gasped, told the lady not to exaggerate. Someone called her stern, but she peacefully sipped her tea. Putting the cup on the plate, the heroine thought that the ladies said this as a joke, but as if they were serious. The girls suddenly became sad when the conversation turned to the financial affairs of the House of Arata. You can't live on orders alone. While he was fighting, his family spent their savings, when suddenly one girl asked Agatha if she still had a bodyguard. She offered Arata's house, the only relatives there being the Marquis himself and his younger sister, and the servants there were mostly war veterans. Agatha thought seriously, especially after the girl said that the Marquis himself was young. There were no elders in the house, which meant there would be no snobbery. Usually old houses like Arata are built on honor and glory. Nobilis looked at her reflection in her teacup, thinking that this house was in a special situation right now with their budget. They would last a month at most. She smiled. She just needed a new shield, the Order of Knights. The girl told the ladies that it sounded convincing, and she wanted to consider this option. Arata's residence was located near the hills and was also illuminated by the sun, but the house's austere architecture with its many clear black line elements gave the residence an unapproachable appearance. The boy ran from the yard onto the veranda, holding a roll of paper in his hand. He stopped behind the Marquis, who was standing with a towel around his neck, apparently taking a break after training. The boy called out to the master, and Arat turned his head, sweat dripping from his face. The man, seeing Conrad out of breath, turned to him completely, asking what had happened. Trying to catch his breath, the boy asked the gentleman, picking up the package, if he knew what news he was bringing. He unfolded the paper and, clearly impressed, exclaimed that the same Agatha Nobilis was asking that the House of Arata take her under its protection. Conrad began to argue in favor of this request, since there were barely enough funds left in the treasury for a couple of weeks, although it would be good if there was enough for a week. The boy with dark circles under his eyes smiled, pointing his finger at the paper, because if they accept this offer, everything changes. He fell on his knees and began tearfully begging the master to make a quick decision. Conrad grabbed Arat by the leg and started shouting for the gentleman to go immediately and tell Agatha that they agreed. The man took a step to the side and briefly motioned for the guy to leave him alone. The gentleman took a deep breath and, without looking at Ben, asked if this was what they were talking about. The man handed the gentleman the papers, informing him that everything was ready. Conrad couldn't believe that they knew everything and remained silent. He cried, asking how they could, and Ben consoled him, patting his shoulder with understanding. Looking at the documents, Arat thought that it was impossible not to know here. Wherever you go, everyone is whispering about her. The documents contained a dossier with a list of the names of Agatha's ex-husbands. Ben said that she had been divorced 6 times, but Conrad exclaimed that it was Nobilis. He spoke enthusiastically that even with the right of inheritance, getting divorced 6 times is not something everyone can do. Isn't that proof of her power? Ben supported the boy. Conrad asked the gentleman if he would take Agatha under his protection, but Arat replied that such things were not decided rashly. The man turned away and continued studying the file. Agatha is 3 years older than him, that is, she is 23. At 13, he lost his parents and was thrown into the war. By this time, she had already been in 2 marriages of convenience. The gentleman looked back at Ben and asked if she had any enemies. The man replied that she always had, only she remained in the straight line. Leaving the training session, Arat concluded that the next step would be the successors from another country. Ben confirmed, with an exhausted Conrad trailing behind him, that this was indeed the case, which was why the emperor was so concerned about who would inherit her name and power. According to imperial laws, if a woman from a direct line is alive, her child inherits everything. As long as Agatha is alive, the side branches will be left with nothing. Arat, studying the dossier, concluded his thought by saying that only the head of the family has the right to call the knights and restore order, and Agatha is only an heiress, without the authority of a leader. In the office, the index finger tapped on the table, as happens when a person is absorbed in himself. Aratus thought that there was no need to rush with the guards, that there was no point in expecting military power from the nobilis, when Conrad bowed to him. He brought the gentleman a financial report, saying that the situation was critical. Tears welled up in his eyes, and he looked at the gentleman with a puppy-like, pleading gaze. Arat put his hand to his head and closed his eyes, thinking about it all. Since he was taken to war, he had not had a day of peace. The man folded his hands under his chin and asked Ben to find out what Lady Nobilis was after. Agatha was welcomed into the house. She asked where His Highness the Crown Prince was, and the servant replied that he was currently resting in his chambers. The girl thought so, she was not surprised, but irritation was visible on her face. Holding the hem of her dress with her hand, she headed towards the door. The white doors with gold trim swung open. Agatha walked over to the bed and took a deep breath. As she exhaled, she screamed loudly about getting up, crushing His Highness with her foot. All disheveled, with his robe open, the guy rose up, indignant, until he recognized Agatha in the face of the one who had disturbed his peace. The girl unceremoniously said that she needed His Highness's help. The guy sat on the edge of the bed, grumbling discontentedly that he asked not to be disturbed in his sleep. Was it really necessary to wake him up? Agatha looked at him sternly and told him to wake up properly and get up, but that look made the guy feel uneasy. The girl was waiting for him in a well-kept garden, where a fountain was babbling and its spray was spreading in the air. Everything around was blooming and green. His Highness walked up to the table and placed his hand on the back of the chair. Agatha was peacefully sipping her tea when he asked what it was this time. The girl suggested organizing a hunt, and the guy became interested in who she wanted to invite this time. Suddenly, he remembered that she had offered Marquis Arata to be her bodyguard, and the guy asked if he had agreed. The heroine nodded. She wanted to test the man in action, so she asked His Highness for assistance. The boy grinned and asked what he would get in return. Agatha looked into his eyes and replied that he would get the very stallion he had been eyeing for a long time. His Highness was delighted. He even jumped up, getting ready to send out the invitations right away. His Highness placed the blue envelope with the red seal on the tray. He became curious about how many more times Agatha planned to marry, and whether she had really decided to rewrite the entire marital history of the empire. The girl said sullenly that she had done wrong, and told His Highness to look around, including himself, to see if he saw at least one worthy groom here. Looking at Enoch Arath's file, the prince joked that he was the 7th contender, but Agatha hadn't decided yet security was the most important thing right now. The girl placed her fingers on the bridge of her nose from tension and sighed, because when she returned, there would probably already be an ambush. She asked the prince to lend her a couple of nights. He himself sighed, replying that she should do as she knew best. During the night, Lady Agatha was informed that news had arrived from His Highness the Crown Prince. The girl was surprised that it happened so soon. From the letter, she learned that the hunt would take place in 3 days. In a postscript, the prince asked Agatha if she was still alive. The heroine heard a metallic clang in the street and turned to the window. In the courtyard, right in front of Nobilis's house, a massacre to the death was taking place. Having written a reply letter, Agatha left her postscript at the bottom, that it is thanks to him. The day of the hunt arrived. The heroine was accompanied by the knights of the palace, whom His Highness had given her, and behind them sat a coachman in a carriage. Lady Nobilis was addressed and looked silently at the knight. He reported that His Highness had already left the castle, but Marquise Arata had not yet left. She thanked the sir, and thought to herself that if the prince had left so early, it meant he liked the horse she had given him. The cart entered the depths of the forest, and the rest of the journey was silent. The knights walked slightly ahead of Agatha. Suddenly, a metallic glint flashed from the depths of the forest. It appeared right in front of the girl. She noticed it. She needed to act, but her whole body seemed numb. Suddenly, she heard the swing of a sword and a sharp blow. The knight deflected the arrow. He gave the order for the knights to stand in battle formation and protect the lady. The scream of attack echoed in my ears, making the blood boil in my veins and my whole body tense as if I was standing on nails. The man turned around and shouted to Agatha that there were too many of them, and asked her to hold on to the reins tighter. "We need to break through, now or never." The girl gripped the reins tighter, and a cry rang out for the horses to break into a gallop. The hooves pounded the ground quickly, causing it to shake. The attacker's commander ordered the fire to be released now. The knight's horse snorted and reared when arrows flew at it. It was quite difficult to restrain such a mare, and even oneself. The knight shouted that it was a trap, and that they had to stop. Agatha heard the order. Impulses sent a signal to her brain, but her body responded slowly. The horses stopped in front of her so abruptly that she barely had time to stand up behind them and lost her balance. Agatha collapsed to the ground. The commander, seeing the fallen horse and Lady Nobilis behind him, shouted if she was okay. Agatha's head was spinning, blood was running down her face, but the girl replied that she was fine, asking the knight not to be distracted and to look ahead. The men in robes pressed forward, the commander shouting that their target was only her. The knights of the palace rushed to attack to protect Agatha. Sitting on the ground with one eye half open, the girl quickly looked ahead, assessing the situation. "There are 5 or 6 attackers for every one of your own." Agatha's fingers reached for the dagger. The blades clanged loudly as they collided with each other, producing a grinding sound. The girl drew her dagger and squatted down, wondering if anyone would come to her aid in time. The commander shouted for the knights to hold on. If they held on, His Highness would notice and arrive. The leader of the attacking group shouted at the warriors not to waste their time on the knights, but to grab the woman. Their goal was the same. Arrows flew rapidly towards Agatha, and a wave of thoughts, calculations, and worries rushed through her head. For example, what were the chances that the crown prince would notice all this? The girl ducked sharply, dodging the arrows, and answered her own question: he won't recognize her. She lowered her head, a stream of blood running down her chin and nose. Agatha realized that this was all a perfectly planned trap. The relatives are serious. They dared to do this right in the imperial domain, risking the wrath of His Majesty himself. This was no longer just a threat. Agatha did not understand why there was such a rush. She was overcome with anxiety. Her breath caught. Just when she was wondering if she would be able to get out of here alive, she noticed a cold glare in front of her. Nobilis raised her head. A hooded and masked man sat in ambush, aiming straight at her, his bowstring drawn, only a second left. It seemed that this was the end, but right before her eyes, an arrow flew past. Someone fired a bow and killed the enemy with one hit. Agatha, whose whole life had flashed before her eyes and whose body was so numb that it was impossible to turn her head, looked away. There was a loud clatter of hooves, and reinforcements appeared from behind the dust raised by the horses. A blue flag fluttered in the wind. These were the Knights of Arata. It seemed as if the frost itself had come with them. Not only the color of the flag, but also the aura of the knights brought chills to the skin. Cold blue eyes like a raging sea stared at the girl. Against this background, her bright eyes seemed innocent and childishly large. Without taking his eyes off her, Eret ordered the knights to prepare for battle. The men of Arata's house acted so quickly that the attackers had no time to react, and just as their commander began to shout about retreat, stuttering, warmth spread across his shoulder as the blade pierced his skin. Agatha couldn't move or look away. She only made one sound. A. She, watching Arata, understood what the matter was. It was all because of him. Within minutes, the attackers were routed and killed, which is why they attacked so hastily. Along with the bloody battle, the sun came out, making the day even brighter. Even after it was all over, the girl couldn't move. The Marquis grasped the edges of the hood with his fingers. He approached the lady and, kneeling before her, asked if she was safe. A blush suddenly appeared on Agatha's face, shining brighter than the abrasions, and her heart began to beat faster. She, as if to clarify, called him by name, and he replied that he was glad that they had finally met. The man introduced himself. At that moment, Agatha became curious about what was on her face, whether her voice was trembling, but out loud she only thanked the Marquise for saving her. Lady Nobilis returned with the knights of the House of Arata, sitting on the Marquise's horse in front of him. Agatha was breathing heavily. Her body was gripped by pain that hit her in a wave after the tension subsided. The Marquis lowered his gaze. He noticed that she was having a hard time. The man pulled the fabric of his cloak with his fingers to wrap it around Nobilis. He said that they were almost there. Agatha's heart skipped a beat. Her cheeks burned, either from embarrassment or from the temperature. Sweat trickled down her face as a man's hand held the fabric at her neck. His Highness, seeing Agatha, shouted her name loudly. He was angry and scared at the same time. The girl looked up at the prince and quietly called him His Highness. The bridge of his nose tightened with tension, and the prince said in fear that she was covered in blood. He cried out in rage that they had gone completely mad. How could they attack a noblewoman under the protection of his order? A wide vein appeared on his face. His Highness's attendant said with concern that the lady's wounds needed to be attended to first, and the prince ordered that this be done quickly. After the medic took Agatha into the carriage, the man reported that the wound had been stitched up first. The lady's life was not in danger, but her body was covered in bruises, and she needed rest. His Highness turned to the carriage window and told Agatha, whose face was pressed into the pillow, that things could have been much worse, and she, breathing heavily, agreed. The prince announced that they would be leaving soon and that she needed to rest, and the girl, whose eyes had darkened from the sudden change in her condition, opened her eyes. She leaned on her hand and slowly rose to her feet. Agatha looked out the window. She looked at Arat, his back to her on his horse, talking to the knight, and thought that when the hunt was over, it would be worth discussing the question of a bodyguard. Agatha's lips parted and she called out to the Marquis. He looked back. The man approached her on horseback and stood level with her at the carriage window, their gazes meeting. A calm, velvety voice asked if my lady had called him. He told her to rest first, she needed to recover, and he would wait for news from her. The carriage set off back to the residence, accompanied by the palace order. When the emperor learned of the attack, he slammed his fist on the table in a rage. His face turned red with anger, and while no one at the meeting dared to make a sound, he shouted, "How dare they, in the capital where he was, arrange this madness?" The politician exclaimed that this scum must be torn out by the roots and taught a lesson. The rest supported him, for how dare they attack a noblewoman who was under the protection of the court? People demanded severe punishment for all those involved. The emperor sat with a gloomy look, his hands folded on the table, and listened to their proposals. In an instant he looked up and looked straight ahead, determination breaking through the anger that had consumed him. He shouted for the Minister of War and the Chief of Intelligence to be summoned to him immediately. His Majesty has given the order to find the killer's lair from today onwards, and find out who is behind this. The Emperor closed his eyes and said wearily that this was why he had not allowed Agatha to divorce. The attack had happened immediately after that. He uttered, as if in indignation, what to do with a goddaughter who could not hear his voice, which caused the prince's eyebrow to arch. His Majesty asked the prince if Agatha was thinking about a new marriage, to which the son replied that only 2 months had passed since the divorce. He bowed to the Emperor and said that he doubted that the girl had found someone during all this time. The Emperor muttered that it was not just 2 whole months, but already 2 months. He shouted at his son to at least look at today. If Agatha had gotten married on time, it wouldn't have come to this. His Highness knew his father, and judging by his violent reaction, he was planning to once again choose a husband for Agatha himself, which was confirmed by the Emperor's words. The boy laughed awkwardly when the father sovereign spoke about choosing a new match for his goddaughter, and said that Agatha would decide for herself when the time came. The Emperor rubbed his chin, replying that the situation was too tense right now, and he was her godfather. Didn't he have the right to help? Aret, who was present at this and standing next to the prince, noticed how His Highness turned pale, frozen with his hand extended. That was the end of the arguments. The man thought that the crown prince seemed to be genuinely partial to Agatha Nobilis, but the Emperor, apparently, is more concerned with information and political calculation. Enoch looked down, mentally arguing that if His Majesty truly valued her, he would not have started talking about marriage while she was barely alive. The image of Agatha Nobilis, with that refined, almost fragile face, appeared before the man's eyes. She was much braver than she looked when she asked if he would come to see her. The Emperor announced that the Crown Prince could go, and His Highness bowed, telling Marquis Arata that he had done well. As a reward for his service, His Majesty awarded the Marquis 3,000 gold pieces. The man thanked the Emperor for his generosity. Enoch Aratus's figure was stately, with his broad back and confident gait, and not only ladies but also men looked after him. The commander of the First Order of the Knights of Arata, Leon Takran, seeing the master, called him. He asked if the Marquis was okay and not injured, to which the man replied that everything was fine, adding that they were returning immediately. The commander saluted the gentleman as the man mounted his horse. Looking at the Marquis, Leon thought that he had become the savior of that very Agatha. It seemed that his name would thunder again throughout the empire. The House of Nobilis always pays generously to those who protect them. That afternoon, Agatha was drinking tea in the courtyard of the residence when the prince asked if she was ready to go outside. The girl replied that she had an appointment. His Highness became curious. He put his hand on the back of the chair and moved it. Nobilis said that she had invited the Marquis of Arata, which surprised the prince, since she had not gotten out of bed for 3 days. Wasn't it too early for activity? Agatha crossed her arms over her chest and replied that it was too late now if she wanted to get married on her own terms. There was no time to waste. When the girl asked about the list of grooms, His Highness exhaled with a grin and said that he was compiling it. Nobilis sighed as she looked at the prince. She expected it to be like this. The war is over. The empire has gained a port and new lands. Now everyone is chasing trade routes. In fact, this was what it all started for. Agatha thoughtfully propped up her chin and said that if we were talking about the eastern continent, an island was needed as a support point. The prince agreed that this was true, so it was necessary to take a closer look at the nobility with lands in that region. Agatha looked at His Highness intently when he said that if she wanted things her way, she must offer something of equal value. She took the pen in her hand and smiled, asking if the prince would help this time too. First, she would make the list accurate, and then she would let him know. His Highness remarked that using him as a personal spy was quite clever. He asked who Agatha had her eye on this time, but the girl had not yet decided. Her hand with the pen froze when he asked if she had someone after her heart. Nobilis thought about the man she liked, and at that moment the image of Arata appeared before her eyes, asking her if this was really what the lady was interested in amidst all this fuss. The girl's cheeks turned pink, her gaze looked somewhere through. Noticing this, the prince grinned. Guessing that there was someone there after all, Agatha politely asked him to be quieter. With a grin stretched from ear to ear, the guy began to wonder who this mysterious chosen one was earlier. Nobilis had said that there were no decent suitors, including him. Agatha did not respond to this and continued writing. The prince was offended by this ignoring. He turned his head away and told her to do it her way. He would just give her the list and would not interfere further. The lady handed the envelope to the servant on a tray, saying that that was enough. She thought that the decision about them was hers. First, she wanted to be sure. By this time, the butler had approached and, bowing, announced that the lady's invited guest had arrived. Agatha asked for him to be brought in. When his figure came into view, the girl wondered if this feeling was just an echo of fear after the attack. But for some reason, the closer Arat got, the faster her heart beat. His Highness rose from the table, saying that it was probably time for him to go, asked Agatha to take care of herself, and she, without turning in his direction, wished him a safe journey. The Marquis looked straight at Agatha with his blue eyes. His dark blue hair was well styled. His jacket emphasized the width of his shoulders. The man crossed the yard and took a step towards the gazebo. Lady Nobilis rose from the table. Arat, approaching her, carefully took her hand in a half bow. He lightly touched her graceful fingers with his lips, and at that moment, not in her head, but from within Agatha, the answer arose. The feeling was real. The man looked up and thanked Lady Nobilis for the invitation. Agatha, her face flushed, wondered if it could be called just a fleeting flash of feeling. Her body felt like it was pierced by electricity. When they sat down at the table, she handed him the papers, saying that she had invited him today to thank him in her own way. The man took the sheets of paper in his hands and unfolded them. Inside, it was said about 100,000 gold coins, an interest-free loan, and the purchase of local goods at a favorable price, as well as the supply of government goods at a fair price. Agatha said that if he needed anything else, he should just say so. Arat, looking at the lady, replied that this was already more than he deserved. The loan and help from their trading house were enough for him. Nobilis kept her gaze on him. She asked if he meant to say that her life was worth less. The valet, who was standing nearby, was struck dumb by this question. The man looked at the lady silently. She looked down, and under the table, covering one hand with the other to stop the trembling, the girl said that although the initiative came from her, this was also compensation for the fact that she was unable to hire the Order of Arata. Enoch asked a counter-question. Did this mean that security was no longer required, to which Agatha replied that it seemed she was getting married. She looked up at him, thinking that she wouldn't beat around the bush. It wouldn't change the point. After all, he is most likely one of the candidates, this war hero and the best knight of the Empire. A tense silence hung in the air. Thoughts swarmed in Nobilis's head. She thought about what if she proposed to him. There were rumors that Arata was only 20, but what if he was not interested in marriage? The creak of a gate was heard in the courtyard, and the two turned their heads. Son of the Roxbad Empire, His Majesty Vormalai II has arrived. Agatha's gaze at that moment radiated discontent, even irritation, for her godfather arrived quickly, even faster than she expected. Having sat down at the table, the emperor first of all asked his goddaughter how she was. He began to bombard her with questions about pain, her well-being, and her sleep, like a sudden gust of wind in broad daylight. The girl replied that thanks to His Majesty she was much better, and the emperor was pleased. At that moment, Agatha thought that no matter what, His Majesty really cared about her. Maybe because she is his goddaughter or because she is the last of the Nobilis line, who knows? Vormalai told Agatha that she must already know. The culprits were punished, and those from the nobility who stood behind them were arrested. The girl was sincerely grateful to the emperor. Having heard the desired words, the emperor decided to get to the point. He asked his goddaughter how she felt about a new marriage, adding that after the assassination attempt he was worried about her safety. Agatha believed it was too early. But the emperor thought otherwise, since 2 months had passed since her divorce, enough for Agatha's position, which embarrassed his goddaughter. She didn't want Arat to see her like this, and yet she didn't want to hide either. The girl forced a smile, asking the emperor if there was already a candidate. He enthusiastically began to tell her that he had already found several suitable ones, and if she wanted, they could arrange a meeting right now. Agatha reminded His Majesty that when she came of age, he promised that the choice of marriage would be hers. Tensingly, the godfather agreed that this was so, but now the situation required marriage. If it were his own order, there would be fewer attacks. And if the husband becomes Agatha's ally, then things will be easier with her relatives. There is logic in the emperor's words, which is why the girl always married according to his decision, but this time she could not agree. She wanted to choose who would become her husband, so the girl asked if there was any need to rush. Agatha assured that she would marry and would never forget His Majesty's care. If the girl gave in even once, she would not be able to stop, so she asked the emperor to give her a little time and the opportunity to choose. His Majesty, folding his hands under his chin, smiled when his goddaughter said that she would personally introduce the candidate to the emperor. He said that if she had decided so, then let her do it her own way. But if he was not satisfied with her choice of spouse, she would marry the one he chose. Agatha promised to make every effort. With this, His Majesty took his leave, heading towards the exit along with his accompanying knights. When the emperor had left, Aratus noticed Nobilis sitting for a while with her eyes closed, tense. Her breathing was heavy. The lady rose from her chair, returning to her papers to continue her conversation with her guest. Her hand shook as he took the sheets from the other side. Agatha looked up at the Marquis in surprise. The man explained that he would take the papers and study everything. She asked if he was already leaving. Aratus gently touched Lady Nobilis's cheek with his index finger. He replied that she looked pale and asked to be allowed to take her inside. She needed rest. The heroine froze, looking after the man, who was as calm as on the day when he threw his cloak over her. This short, almost casual gesture shook her soul like a gust of wind. Agatha touched her cheek with her finger, where his touch was still felt. A piercingly warm, unexpected wave covered her from head to toe, and her lips said that it was strange, but pleasant. Arata's mansion glowed especially brightly in the afternoon sun that day. The Marquis was sitting at his desk in the study when Ben brought him a cup of tea, and the young man waited for the conversation to begin. Aratus wearily touched his forehead with his finger, saying that he wanted to hope that he was mistaken in his thoughts. However, the young man replied that the Marquis was right. These were letters of recommendation from ladies who wanted to become his spouses. The Marquis was silent for a while. Crossing his arms, he thought that the war was not easy, but the sword was much simpler than all this. These letters weighed down like a weight. Now he tried to imagine what it was like for Agatha, standing at the epicenter of power. Taking the cup in his hands, the man thought that every meeting with her was like opening a new page. This girl, fragile at first glance but strong to the core, and the way she gently leads even the emperor is mesmerizing. Perhaps that is why she seems even more vulnerable to him. The man remembered how difficult it had been for Lady Nobilis after her conversation with His Majesty. Aratus was silent, thinking that she had not yet fully recovered. The Marquis shook his head slightly, clearing his thoughts, and asked Ben if he had figured out what he had asked him about. The man replied to my lord that everything was as he had expected. Relatives were already climbing into the houses from which these letters had come. As expected, while the Marquis was away at war, those who remained in Arata's house were not idle. The man, studying the information, said that this needs to be stopped in the bud before it takes root. Ben added that they are now getting names, but they are too cautious. Aratus tapped his finger on the table in thought. Suddenly a calm but unexpected question came from his lips. Maybe he should get married. The man was taken aback and asked the gentleman if he was serious. The Marquis answered without hesitation that yes, if it would stop what was happening, he was ready for that too. Enoch Aratus continued to think about a political marriage. He bent his head over the papers. Deep in thought, he needed the woman who would not be led astray even by the temptations of his family. Whatever hands reach out, she should not feel the need to grab them. It had to be the one who already had everything, and when Aratus thought about this, the image of Agatha popped into his head. He just caught himself thinking about her again, every time it happened involuntarily. She is the best choice for him, but it is unlikely that Agatha Nobilis will choose him. The Marquis was informed that the vassals had already gathered, and the man rose from the table. Straightening his shirt sleeve, the gentleman asked Ben to simultaneously select candidates for a political alliance, but only from houses that would not benefit from getting close to his relatives. At this time, Agatha was brought a list of candidates from the Crown Prince. One of the list was Duke Jude of Sicherville. He currently has one mistress and several women on the side. He often visits gambling houses, at least twice a month. Agatha sighed, deciding that he was not on this list at all. The only reason he was on this list was that the Empire needed access to a new port in the east, and for that, it needed support. The nearest convenient island belongs to the Duke of Sicherville, and in order to avoid marrying him, another route is needed. There is a suitable island north of the Nobilis domain. But there's one catch. It borders the waters of the MANHWA Empire. Therefore, it will be necessary to conduct naval negotiations with MANHWA. The guy in glasses, patiently waiting for the lady to look over the list, asked her what to do, and Agatha replied that there was no other way out. Negotiations with MANHWA were the best option. The boy said that he wondered how Prince Fernand of MANHWA would behave, which made Nobilis's brows furrow. She called the prince an official and asked him not to even pronounce his name. The boy bowed, asking for forgiveness. If she could, Agatha would avoid this union, but she has no choice. Then, due to Fernand's constant affairs, love scandals flared up one after another. Agatha's broken heart became the subject of ridicule at court, and the girl understood perfectly well that if she played on this, MANHWA would have to sit down at the negotiating table. The girl closed her eyes, mentally calling her godfather cunning, because he knew that everything would fall on her, and that's why he gave in when she said that she would choose the groom herself. Lady Nobilis asked that the conditions under which MANHWA was prepared to speak be clarified, and that the list of candidates be given to her separately. When the secretary left, the girl leaned over the table to move on to the next file. Marquis Enoch Arata, as the girl expected, turned out to have a brilliant reputation. He has never visited a gambling house, has no love affairs, and is not involved in violence. Agatha likes this. However, the Marquis has just returned from the war. Will he now want to enter into a political marriage? Suddenly, the lady was informed that Marquis Arata had arrived. The girl rose abruptly from the sofa and asked to see him out. When the door opened, Nobilis was standing at the table, holding the lid of the sugar dish in her hand. She turned around. The Marquis, dressed to the nines, had a pleasant coolness in his gaze and posture. There was something extremely alluring about him. Entering the room, he turned his head to the side, towards Agatha. Nobilis's breathing immediately stopped, and not only her cheeks but also her ears turned red. She, feeling that she had been looking at the man longer than she should have and was blushing, turned away abruptly, briefly greeting him and inviting him to sit on the sofa. Agatha poured hot tea into mugs, as is customary among nobles during social conversations or tête-à-tête conversations. However, Arat stopped where he stood. He did not move from the spot during this time. Nobilis was about to turn away, wondering why the Marquis was simply watching and remaining silent. At that moment, the man took a few steps towards her. Arat came up almost right up to her, and the girl's body felt hot when a calm voice so close asked if she was really preparing the treats herself. Agatha's gaze clouded over a little. The man was so close to her that she could feel his breath. Having collected herself, she turned to him, languidly raising her hand, and replied that she had been busy all day. Her head was buzzing. She wanted to stretch her legs. The man understood her perfectly. He leaned toward the lady's hand and, clasping it with his fingers, kissed it tenderly. Agatha asked if rose tea would be okay, but Arat was not picky. The man saw the sweets and offered to put them on the table. When he passed by the sofa, his gaze accidentally fell on the file with his name. The Marquis stopped, his lips parted in surprise, but he did not utter a word out loud. Noticing that the man was standing still, Agatha asked if something was wrong, if something had happened. She gasped, noticing with concern that Arata's gaze was fixed on the dossier. They drank tea in silence for a while, Lady Nobilis thinking about the fact that the Marquis had said nothing about it. She looked at him, wondering if it had really bothered him. However, his impartial face did not betray any emotions. The man sat calmly, crossing his legs, but even in this pose he looked stately. Just as Agatha was thinking about the dossier he had noticed, he started talking about the documents. He asked for the 7th time if this was not a list of suitors, to which the lady answered in the affirmative, the thought flashing through her mind that the Marquis would hardly be pleased with this. So Agatha secretly tested him. No wonder it was annoying. The girl sighed and said that there were things she would not tolerate in marriage, so she was checking in advance. She asked if he was offended. However, the Marquis calmly replied that no, because he too was collecting information about her. They were in the calculation. Agatha felt awkward. At first she was surprised to hear about it, but then she thought that he was probably collecting a dossier when she offered him protection. The Marquis explained that before getting closer, a nobleman must know who is in front of him. Nobilis supported this idea. The lady asked him if he was currently busy with the same issue, marriage. She had heard that letters from ladies were sent to his residence every day. Arit looked down, replying that he had not intended to get married at first, but the events of the last few days had changed everything. Agatha didn't understand what they were talking about because she hadn't heard anything about Arata's house these days. The man looked Nobilis in the eyes and addressed her. When all the girl's attention was directed at the Marquis, the man suddenly, point blank, asked her if she would marry him. The question was so unexpected that Agatha's eyes widened, her lips pressed together, and a current ran through her body. She became embarrassed and asked him to repeat what he had just said, pointing her finger at herself, as if clarifying about marriage with her. Agatha's body began to tremble, and she clutched the fabric of her dress with her fingers when the man said that he realized that, by all parameters, the lady suited him best. Moreover, he almost resigned himself to the fact that she would not agree, and from these words, Nobilis's heart began to beat faster. The man asked her to let him know if she was even a little interested in him. For the first time, Agatha was truly drawn to someone, and this man, with crystal blue eyes and a scar on his face that suited his appearance so well, was asking her to consider this marriage without pressure. The girl was silent, but at that moment she decided that even if a political union gave her the chance to be close to him, she couldn't miss it. Even if the burden on their hearts is different, he also wants to be with her, and Agatha smiled. With that soft smile and that piercing, though she didn't know it, look, she asked if the Marquis would then become her seventh husband, causing the man to freeze. He didn't expect a positive answer, let alone a quick one, but his appearance seemed to become more relaxed after the lady's words. Arit considered it necessary to ask if Lady Nobilis was absolutely sure of such a quick decision, to which Agatha nodded. She picked up the document and pointed to the top line, asking if the Marquis could see it. His name was written at the top. Agatha said that the fact that his name was on the very first line of the dossier meant one thing, namely that he was her best choice. Origin, wealth, position at court, family influence, and everything else. What usually occupies aristocrats has never been the main thing for Agatha. The lady asked the Marquis if he was fond of gambling. To this question and to the next one, whether he has a woman, he answered negatively. Then a question flew from the girl's lips that couldn't help but make one shudder if she gave birth to a child. Would the Marquis try to kill her? The man did not answer right away because he was a little shocked. Noticing his confusion, Agatha explained with a smile that, unfortunately, her fourth ex was exactly like that. The girl added that this is in the past. The man asked if she had any demands on him. Agatha asked in surprise if he was ready to accept her conditions, to which the man replied that he would try. Because that's what his wife wants. These words sent shivers through the girl's body. Nobilis took a cup of tea in her hand and slowly took a sip. She asked the Marquis to protect her from her family, and she also wanted to live not in his residence, but in a separate house for newlyweds. Besides this, Agatha asked that her rights as a wife be respected, but Arit already understood this. He remained silent, waiting to hear something else. There was a pause in the air, and then he himself wondered if that was all, which made Agatha herself confused. A request for love sounded in her head, but the lady was not going to ask for such nonsense. She chuckled thoughtfully, wondering what could be more absurd than talking about feelings in a marriage of convenience. Nobilis smiled and replied that that would be enough. The man did not expect that the list of demands would be so small. He looked away and covered his mouth with his hand, saying that he really didn't understand what Agatha's previous marriage was like. After all, following these rules is the basis for a good marital foundation, but when the girl asked again, the Marquis decided not to raise this topic. He rose from the sofa and, walking around the table, approached Lady Nobilis. The man got down on one knee in front of her, saying he had only one request. Arit, looking straight into her eyes, said it: no connections with his relatives. He believed that Agatha was in a position to achieve this, and nothing would lead her astray. The man wanted to hear confirmation of his words. A smile appeared on Nobilis's lips. She touched the Marquise's outstretched palm with her fingers and replied that she had support that was more reliable than could be found, so it was a wise decision. The man, who usually remained impartial, smiled back. That brief moment of his smile made Agatha's heart flutter, and then his lips covered Nobilis's fingers with a soft touch. The girl didn't know what to call this feeling in her chest. The Marquis, tearing himself away from the lady's hand, looked up at her and said that he accepted her conditions. He asked again if she would marry him then. Agatha's refined face, which usually had an appearance of elegant pallor, was radiant with color, and the lady replied that she would be delighted. All that remained was to obtain His Majesty's approval. Nobilis added that some things need to be sorted out before that. Negotiations with MANHWA will begin after the wedding, but Pahlavi Island must be prepared as a trading base, with sea routes, a port, and an expanded city in advance. The Marquis asked if this was connected with His Majesty's insistence on their marriage. Agatha confirmed, saying that he might have heard about it. The Emperor was extremely interested in the eastern continent, so in exchange for refusing the proposed groom, she would give him one island. By the way, the lady said that she could give one of her islands to the Marquis. He was amazed at how calmly she said such things. Agatha replied that that was why she was offering it, because she could. Suddenly the lady gasped. Remembering the offer that had been given to the Marquis, she asked to return it. The man's hand reached for the document on the table. He looked Agatha in the eye and told her to think that he had not seen it, for it would look as if he were receiving payment for the woman who would become his wife. Lady Nobilis countered that that was before there was talk of marriage. She rose from the sofa, leaned over slightly, and snatched the document from the Marquis's hands, adding that this was a way to understand exactly what the House of Arata was currently lacking. Watching the man's reaction, the heroine thought that he didn't seem particularly enthusiastic about it, but marriage is one thing, and the price for salvation is quite another. She smiled and indicated that in a couple of days they would go together to His Majesty, and as soon as an audience was scheduled, she would contact the Marquis. Thus ended their meeting. Enoch Arata returned to his residence. Inside he was met by Ben, who, as always, accepted the master's outer garment and bowed respectfully to him. There were many people present at the residence today. The Marquis asked if there was anything special, but Ben replied that there was not. As the gentleman walked through the hall, many glances were directed at him, all of them tense. The Marquis glanced at the hands of the two men. Both held rolls of parchment as they stood waiting their turn. Arrett asked Ben to return all the letters of introduction that came. The man was surprised, really all of them without exception. The Marquis's answer was firm: he was going to get married. The servants of the house, even Ben himself, had their eyes widened at such news from the master. The man was indeed quite surprised, because just a couple of days ago the gentleman had ordered a list of candidates for a marriage of convenience to be compiled. Ben hesitated, and then asked the Marquis if he really had a lady in mind. The gentleman replied that he had one in mind, then Ben asked what kind it was. The Marquis did not answer immediately, only after they entered the office. Arrett walked up to the table and, turning his back to it, leaned his palms on the edge. The man uttered a well-known name in response to Ben's question, Agatha Nobilis. The gentleman's jacket, which the butler was holding in his hand, fell to the floor. Ben was so shocked that he stuttered on the word genus. He asked the gentleman if he was sure. When the Marquis said that they had already given their consent, the man grabbed his head and his mouth froze in an open position. He couldn't believe that the gentleman had already received approval. Sweat was pouring down his face and the question was racing through his head, hadn't the Marquis gone there just to discuss the terms? Ben didn't know what had happened there, but Agatha was the perfect housewife, exactly what Arata's house needed right now, so the man gave a thumbs up and said he would destroy the list immediately. The butler coughed and expressed his congratulations to the master, noting that the other vassals would be no less surprised than he. Arrett lowered his gaze, an intention maturing in his head. And just a few moments later, the Marquis asked Ben to prepare flowers, deciding that it was time to officially ask for her hand. Ben bowed, saying that even if this was a marriage of convenience, the rules of decency had not been abolished, so he would collect and present the most beautiful bouquet. The butler gasped, remembering Lady Agatha's offer, and asked with concern if that meant it didn't count. The Marquis chuckled and replied that perhaps not. Ben's eyes nearly popped out of his head when the gentleman said that Lady Nobilis would not be persuaded she seriously intended to pay the price for the life she saved. His cheeks flushed and his face lit up with joy. The man called the lady extraordinary. It was no wonder she had decided to sort out the family situation in advance, since Agatha ran the entire household. Arata looked away without responding, and although the reason was not only the things Ben had listed, the Marquis decided that he should let the butler think as he wished. The Marquise thought that it would be good if Ben and she found a common language. It would be beneficial, but the man had a feeling that even at the wedding the lady would not stop pulling everything on herself. But if Ben were there to lend a shoulder, would it make her feel better? Arata touched his chin with his finger, wondering if it was too early to talk about this, although it was normal to worry about his future wife. Ben said enthusiastically that now was not the time to think. He would immediately start ordering flowers. The Marquis also instructed the man to monitor how his relatives behaved. They would definitely not remain silent. Ben went off to carry out his errands, leaving the Marquis alone with his thoughts. The man looked towards the desk, thinking that he should warn Isabel in advance. There was a sheet of blank paper on the table and a pen on it. Marquis Enoch approached his training with the utmost responsibility. He trained the knights until their breathing became convulsive and their legs began to buckle. And it was at that moment that Conrad, out of breath, rushed into the arena along with the other guys, calling for the head of the family. The man's nose wrinkled at the sight of them. The Marquis turned away and sighed loudly. He asked Leon to take over the training while he went and saw what was going on. The boys ran so fast that if they really wanted to, they could have demolished an entire field. The breathless boys began to bombard the gentleman with questions about whether he was really getting married and wanted to know who the bride was. It had already dawned on them that the Marquis had ordered all letters of introduction to be returned, and that the wedding was not really the price to pay for a life saved. The Marquis, being a calm man, could hardly control himself. He told them to stop. His gaze at that moment was especially oppressive, and his aura seemed to turn black. The man said that if they made noise, he would not say anything. And the boys, although they were impatient, obediently pressed their lips in silence. Arata crossed his arms over his chest and told them to ask questions calmly one by one. When asked what the guys were interested in, they all exclaimed in unison who the master was taking as a wife. The man calmly said the name of Agatha Nobilis. All three of them simultaneously froze when the gentleman said that consent had already been received, and in a couple of days he would go to the official matchmaking. Enoch was ready to answer the next question, but the boys didn't know where to start. One's jaw dropped, another grabbed his head, the third almost jumped. Conrad, not believing his ears, asked whether the gentleman meant that very heiress of the Nobilis family. The Marquis replied with an unperturbed expression that yes, and that the terms of the offer would be fulfilled. Such a loud screech arose in the arena that a flock of birds flying nearby fluttered. Conrad, perplexed and shocked at the same time as he was happy with the news, asked why else would he pay the price for life if it was marriage, and whether the Marquis was really getting married. The man answered briefly, yes. At that moment, Ben approached the arena. He quickly but carefully walked towards the master. Ben really didn't just tell the Marquise to go to the entrance of the residence for no reason. The courtyard outside was filled with carriages. Denny Keeler, the first manager of the Nobilis house, greeted the Marquise and introduced himself. Arata, who had managed to change into a suit with a starched white shirt and an elegant gray tie, asked if the guest had arrived to fulfill the terms of the offer. The boys stared at the manager, who replied that the lady had been pushing him as hard as she could, finally realizing that it was true after all. Conrad held out his palms to the carriages, guessing that this was the fulfillment of Lady Agatha's proposal, and the man confirmed that these were documents for 100,000 coins and a trade agreement. The boy couldn't hide his astonishment as his mouth dropped open, for the matter was about a decent-sized annual budget, and it had already been prepared. Denny Keeler handed Marquis Arata an elegant letter in a black envelope, sealed with red wax, with pink accents from Lady Agatha. All three boys leaned to the side at the same time, looking at the envelope. The letter was specially signed, namely, to my beloved future groom. Agatha wrote that such things should not be postponed, so she sent the administrator in the morning, because they would soon be married. But the lady was worried that this would be tactless, and she also informed that she would receive permission for an audience in the coming days. Entry into the palace for the Marquis has already been arranged. He can come for it at any time. Agatha is looking forward to their next meeting. At the end of the letter, she signed herself as his bride. The Marquise thought that before the letters were so dry, as if they were written by a secretary, but this one was surprisingly warm. The man didn't notice how he asked out loud, like, "Is she like this with everyone?" Conrad asked again, but the Marquis straightened up calmly and hid the envelope in the inside pocket of his jacket. Enoch invited the steward of the noblest house inside to sort out some business. The deal was successful, and only one green carriage left the residence. After the treaties were concluded, the Marquis of Enoch walked up the stairs with Ben, the rest of the boys walking behind. The man entered the office and sat down at his pen again. Without raising his eyes to the guys, he said that the engagement had been confirmed, they had congratulated him, and that they were jumping around the estate again. The boys were inspired. They asked how everything happened so quickly, whether there was anything that the Marquis would exchange with Lady Agatha in honor of the engagement. They even asked what was in that letter. The Marquis silently showed them out the door, every single one of them. Conrad was not ready to give up so easily. He asked the guys if they had seen the first lines of the letter that the gentleman had sent her. The two nodded tensely at the same time, as if they had learned some important secret. Conrad was going crazy. He asked the boys if it was really their master who wrote to his beloved daughter-in-law in the first line. The office door opened and the three fell into tense silence. Ben, noticing the boys, was surprised that they hadn't left yet. Conrad asked how it went. He pointed his finger at the envelope Ben was holding, saying that he saw something unexpected. The man lifted the envelope with one wave of his fingers and said that the gentleman had put his whole heart into the letter. The Marquis entrusted the letter to Ben before sending it, wondering if it was too much, but the man replied that, on the contrary, it was the warmest of the master's recent letters. The guys were already happy that this would be more than just a marriage of convenience. The boy said something that made everyone's faces in the corridor immediately darken, and a thick tension could be felt in the air. That this is the master's first true love since then. Conrad asked the guy to be quieter and asked why such conversations were taking place on such a bright day. The boy apologized and Conrad sighed. He turned to Ben and enthusiastically asked him to let him know first if there was any occasion to visit the lady. Reading the Marquis's letter, Agatha couldn't stop smiling. Usually the man's handwriting was light, as if it were flying. But this time he probably tried very hard and wrote carefully. Each letter was written with special care. Lady Nobilis blossomed when she was told that the Marquis had arrived, and she replied that she was going to the reception room. She walked towards him, accompanied by 2 servants and knights. The valet pulled the rope, loudly announcing that the lady had arrived. As the doors opened for Agatha, she was greeted by a rich floral scent. And the more the doors opened in different directions, the stronger he was. In the passageway, Agatha involuntarily froze, seeing the Marquis, impeccably dressed as always. The man held a bouquet of flowers in his hands, clad in white gloves. The Marquis's appearance left Lady Nobilis speechless for a moment. The man handed the lady a bouquet, saying that he had tried to choose one that would suit her, and he hoped that she would like the flowers. Agatha looked down at the bouquet, carefully holding it to herself. She said in embarrassment that she really liked it. The girl thought that after all that coldness, such concern was unfair. The Marquis knelt before her. This happened in the presence of servants and knights who gasped in unison. Arata said that even though they had only known each other for a short time, he would always protect her, no matter the circumstances. The knights themselves blushed, watching such an intimate moment in the lady's life. The Marquis swore to protect Agatha. He barely touched the space between the fingers of her hand with his lips, scalding the thin skin with his hot breath. And raising his head to Lady Nobilis, he asked if she would accept his proposal. Agatha's heart was beating so fast that it seemed like it was about to jump out of her chest. She thought that this was just a marriage of convenience, and the Marquis was speaking with such seriousness and sincere intention. She gently touched the man's hand and pulled it slightly so that he rose from his knee. Agatha, looking into his eyes, said that she heard his oath. Her amethyst eyes sparkled brighter than usual. The girl rose on her toes, and she kissed the Marquis on the cheek, holding onto his shoulder with her hand. Pulling away, Agatha said that she accepted his proposal. They left the palace together arm in arm, and people gathered in the courtyard. And they were all already whispering among themselves, looking now at Agatha Nobilis, now at Marquis Enoch Aratus. Watching them, the heroine thought that the rumors seemed to have already spread. She raised her head straight and closed her eyes, realizing that there were too many ears in the palace. It was inevitable. Noticing that the lady had closed her eyes, the Marquis asked her if she felt better, and the girl replied that she did, but she still felt good that he was worried. The man looked into her eyes, which looked with tenderness and were so open to him. The courtyard was decorated in honor of the event. Even the fountain sparkled more in the sun thanks to the golden wreaths laid around it. The valet handed Lady Agatha the documents. It was a plan of action that needed to be submitted to His Majesty. Taking the papers in his hands, the man saw that they were talking about trade with the Eastern continent. He looked Agatha in the eye, asking if she would personally handle the negotiations with MANHWA. The lady replied that she would prefer to remain in the shadows, but His Majesty would certainly insist that she go. The man asked if there was a special reason for this, and the girl looked down. She said that the empire's relations with MANHWA are currently strained due to her divorce from Prince Fernand, who is originally from there. Arata was silent. Sympathy, a drop of concern, and a desire to support merged into a single bottle inside him. Lady Agatha explained that it had been nearly 10 years ago and that MANHWA was at fault, but that if she spoke out, the tension would ease. The girl added that it looked like they would have to go to that island, but the Marquise did not object. Agatha looked at him, wondering if she had surprised the man. Not a single muscle on Arata seemed to twitch. At that moment, the valet ran up to them, bowed, asking forgiveness from Lady Nobilis and Lord Aratus, and the heroine asked what had happened. The guy said that His Majesty was inviting them to dinner in 2 days. Nobilis and Arat exchanged glances. The girl smiled with her eyes closed, saying that His Majesty seemed to already know about their engagement. She asked if they would see each other at the palace. The Marquis answered no, which Nobilis did not expect. When she opened her eyes, Arata's face was a few centimeters away from hers, so she could feel his warm breath. The man slightly turned the lady's chin with his fingers and gently touched her cheek with his lips. This gesture caused the guests to fall silent at the same time, their gazes turning towards the two of them. Right next to Agatha's ear, the Marquis said that he would come for her, and then, slowly moving away, asked her to simply be ready on the appointed day. When saying goodbye, the man said that they would see each other in 2 days. Without waiting for an answer, he headed towards the carriage, accompanied by Arata's knights. The thought immediately occurred to him that he had been too hasty. The man didn't know what came over him, but the moment his lips touched her cheek, it was pleasant, even too pleasant. From the first time they met, Agatha was constantly on his mind. Tired, fragile, and still, first and foremost, she cared not about herself, but about the order in the house. The man's gaze darted through space, his mind returning to the kissing scene. The way Agatha quickly stood on her toes and touched his cheek with her lips sent shivers through his entire body, as if an electric current had run through his nerves. And her closed eyes and parted lips, which were so close to his lips, spread a wave of aching warmth from her stomach to her heart. The Marquis caught himself thinking that she was still in his head. One cannot fail to mention another residence, which, despite its light facade, did not sparkle in the sun, as if reflecting the state of its owner, the residence of Duke Nuta. He slammed his clenched fist down on the table with all his might. The girl was furious, shouting that not even 3 months had passed since the divorce, and Agatha was already getting married again. She hysterically asked her mother, who was drinking tea, what they should do, because Theodore would become a laughingstock. The woman asked her daughter not to worry about it, because if Agatha had any sense left, she would not have done this. The lady's face distorted, her eyebrows arched down to the bridge of her nose, and the woman confidently declared that as long as she was alive, this wedding would not happen. The girl, pressing her hand to her chest, said that she hoped for her mother's wisdom, but Agatha was a completely different story. Her daughter agreed with her and told her grandmother about it. The young lady turned around and asked rhetorically with irritation whether Agatha had ever bowed her head before them. Always, straightening her back, looking straight into his eyes, she insisted that she could not do this. The lady's eyes blazed with hatred, and she exclaimed that Nobilis was always like this. As she served dessert, she exclaimed furiously that Agatha always said they were oppressing her, which was why Theodore looked at them differently. Even if dirty rumors start, Agatha will not cover them up because then, during the divorce, she allowed everything to fly apart. The mother agreed with her, saying that because of this they could not go out in the spring and were still sitting locked up like in a cage. She turned to her mother with indignation, saying, "So, should she just silently watch? They need to give an answer." The woman looked down into her mug, and wrinkles were visible at the corners of her eyes, on the bridge of her nose, and at the lips, indicating age and fatigue. Theodore doesn't leave his room for days the last time she saw him. He was sitting at the table, clutching a bottle in his hand and covering his face with his hand. His eyes were red from tears, his face pale. The man asked if they couldn't look at her with warmth just once. The woman said out loud how such a prickly weed had grown in Nobilis's house. She raised her head and decisively added that giving instructions to the one who had recently been her daughter-in-law was also a matter. Agatha has a very strong patron, so you can't take her head on, but if you think everything through, shame is possible, and the best place for this is an autumn hunt. The day came when the Marquis and Lady Nobilis were going to meet His Majesty. The girl went out into the courtyard and called out to the man. Seeing her outfit, Arata froze and seemed to lose the ability to speak, which is the best compliment for a woman. Lady Nobilis was dressed in a yellow dress that suited her figure so well, which shone even more brightly in this appearance. The blue hem flowed royally down the steps, and this outfit associated the girl with a sun-loving flower. Eret took the lady's hand and kissed it in a bow. He asked the lady how her night had gone, and she said that she had already prepared for the upcoming battle. With an imperturbable face, the Marquis asked if this was her battle attire. Lady Nobilis took the man by the arm, replying that it was so, after all, the meeting was with His Majesty. One must not give reason to doubt oneself. Arata's heart skipped a beat when he saw this gorgeous woman, and her fingers, lightly squeezing his hand, seemed to transmit signals to his body and trigger a wave of goosebumps. The Marquis and Lady Agatha boarded a snow-white carriage drawn by white horses with long manes and set off on their journey. Enoch sat by the window and looked into the distance. This unusual silence made Agatha ask if something had happened. The man gasped and apologized, adding that he had not been attentive enough to the lady. He placed his hand on the jabot, saying that they should set a wedding date, and asked about preferences, but Agatha believed that His Majesty would determine the date. And she will take care of the preparations, dresses, decorations, and choosing a location for the ceremony. The girl was a little annoyed, because before this she had never been allowed to choose for herself due to politics and the groom's origin, but suddenly they would allow it now. Agatha said that there is a temple not far from the capital, modest but beautiful. She would like to hold the ceremony there. The Marquis believed that it would be better if the venue reflected the taste of the bride rather than the groom, so he told Lady Nobilis to do as she saw fit. The heroine blushed, and a flash of interest flashed through her mind as to why such warm words were escaping those cold lips. Upon arrival, the man asked the lady if she had already thought about her honeymoon, to which Agatha replied that any coast would suit her, as long as there was a sea. It could be an island, a seaside town. Anything would do, and as soon as the lady mentioned the island, the man thoughtfully rolled the word around on his tongue. At this moment they were informed that they had arrived at the palace. The Emperor greeted the guests with particular warmth and told Agatha and the Marquis, whom they had not seen for a long time, to pass through. His Majesty began the conversation by saying that he had heard that Enoch had asked for the hand of his goddaughter. The Emperor was genuinely delighted, calling the war hero and his goddaughter a wonderful couple, which made Agatha feel relieved. His Majesty decided to get straight to the point. Without long speeches, he asked if everything was ready. Lady Nobilis thanked them for their attention and gestured to the valet to bring the package into which they had placed everything. His Majesty unfolded the paper and began to read the contents with a smile. He touched his chin with his finger and grinned, calling Agatha a worthy goddaughter, and it was as if she had read his thoughts and appeared with the perfect groom and an impeccable plan. The girl smiled, replying that her godfather was praising her, and she suggested discussing everything over dinner. The bell rang and various delicious dishes appeared on the table, including red crayfish and pineapple stew. Agatha didn't hide her pleasure from the food. She kept her fork in her mouth as the crayfish meat was absorbed by every fiber of her taste buds. The Marquis noticed that the lady was partial to seafood, and the girl said that she loved everything connected with the sea. She even suggested they go fishing together later in a coastal town, mentioning that she wasn't a very good fisherman, but she loved to cook and eat freshly caught fish. The Marquis replied that he had once been fishing in the river, hoping that it would come in handy. The Emperor sat contentedly, smiling from ear to ear, watching the young people. He said that if they got along like this before the wedding, then he could rest easy. Agatha Nobilis thanked His Majesty for his work and asked how he liked her plan. Raising a glass of wine to his lips, the Emperor asked a counter-question why the unnecessary ceremony she had never disappointed him before. The emperor began to praise his goddaughter, saying that she was smart and cared about him, and told the marquis to take care of Agatha. He would check it out. His Majesty asked when the wedding would be, since the sooner the better, and Agatha said that everything needed to be thought through, but most likely next month. The emperor chuckled, agreeing that the beginning of the month would be appropriate. Today he was planning to send ambassadors to MANHWA with news the answer would come in a month, and then Agatha would need to speak there. The emperor asked whether his goddaughter would have time, given that she still had to go to Pahlavi. It may be necessary to allocate a separate area for them. The girl smiled and then suggested postponing the ceremony, since the MANHWA Empire would certainly want to inspect the territories. She could meet them right there, and when the lady said so, the marquis spoke her name. He said that the journey to Pahlavi was long, and before meeting the MANHWA ambassadors there, it would be safer if she already had a husband. The emperor said that Enoch was right. MANHWA could demand a dynastic marriage. The man suggested including Pahlavi Island in the honeymoon itinerary and going there together. He won't let Agatha go there alone. The MANHWA Empire is the palace of the second prince. Prince Ferdinand received the news quite quickly. His brows furrowed when he learned that Agatha was getting married again. He squeezed the paper in his hand and, getting out of bed, muttered that it was time to stop. How many weddings and divorces, and then back to the altar again. A vein appeared on his face. The man muttered through his teeth that this time it was a war hero and one with a scar. The prince sat down on the sofa in front of the mess on the table, where berries were scattered and an empty bottle of champagne lay. He said that it would be possible to simply return to the tried-and-true option, to him. He was handsome and never let her down in bed, and this time Fernand was going to be the best option for her. The prince exclaimed furiously and waved his arms. How could one not choose someone as perfect as him? And the girls in his bed sighed. When the man calmed down, he thought that he should find out who was now with Agatha. He called for someone who was there, and the valet entered the room. The prince ordered that everything be prepared immediately, and he headed to the office. Sometime later, an engagement party was held at the noblest residence. Lady Agatha was as graceful as ever. The ladies congratulated her on her upcoming wedding. They heard that she had been proposed to just like in real romances. The girls noticed how Lady Agatha was simply radiant today. They couldn't wait to see her wedding dress, which would certainly be luxurious. Agatha thanked the ladies for their kindness and for coming despite the haste. The girls also heard that Lady Nobilis had recently returned to the mansion. They were waiting for her to reopen the salon, and Agatha smiled. She was pleased to hear this. She often wondered how they were doing there during these months. The conversation was lively and filled with pleasant emotions. The ladies couldn't stop smiling and chatting about everything. The girl with burgundy hair said that now, of course, the main topic is Lady Agatha. The heroine was surprised that they were still interested in her wedding. She thought that this was already a familiar sight. She had a rich history. The girls laughed, noticing that Lady Agatha knew how to tease. Smiling, the heroine thought that she apparently always remained an object of discussion for the nobility. Rumors of her seventh wedding and the trade agreement with MANHWA had already spread throughout the court, and society. They even spoke of the atmosphere, not of calculation, but of genuine tenderness. About an invitation from the emperor himself to a wedding dinner, and about the fact that she would become the mistress of the island, a new trading point. And rumors spread instantly that they would combine their honeymoon with the Marquis on Pahlavi with negotiations. The red-haired girl shyly asked when the ceremony was scheduled. Agatha smiled. That was why she invited them. Lady Nobilis wanted to personally hand the invitations to the ladies. She called Jessie. Each noble lady receives an envelope, tied with a ribbon and sealed with a wax seal and a feather. The girls were amazed that the wedding ceremony would take place in just 3 weeks. Jessie leaned over to Lady Nobilis and whispered in her ear about the Marquis's arrival. Agatha did not expect his visit. The girl turned around, looking for her fiancé. He walked towards the gazebo across the courtyard, his valet walking behind him. When the man looked up, he noticed Agatha sitting surrounded by noble ladies, with her blue hat on her head and a delicate dress with a bow. Lady Nobilis blushed, her face glowing at the sight of Enoch. The man stopped, surprised by such a joyful greeting, but did not show it. Agatha went down to him, asking if he had really come. He said that he had a busy day today, but the Marquis only came in for a minute. He just wanted to see her and hoped he wasn't disturbing her. Agatha didn't object in any way and asked what was next on his schedule. The valet replied that there would soon be a lunch with the Minister of Finance. Extending her hand in the Marquise's dress-colored gloves, Agatha asked if the man could spare her 20 minutes. The garden was especially beautiful today. Arata took the lady's hand, causing the ladies watching them from the gazebo to blush and gasp. Agatha told the ladies to continue their conversation and promised to return soon, and she and the Marquise went for a walk. The man noticed that the lady looked paler than usual. Nobilis assumed that it was because she had not been sleeping well lately. She suddenly said that she had sent 3 renovation plans for their house through Ben. The Marquis had already seen them, and he liked the third option the most. Blushing, Agatha said that it seemed to her the most correct. It had a separate matrimonial bedroom. The girl doubted whether it was too much for a political marriage, and that is why she delivered it last. It seemed to the lady that after dinner with His Majesty, the Marquis had become more determined, as if he were beginning to approach her, and while she was thinking about this, Enoch said that he wanted to secure her consent in advance. As Agatha remembers, his relatives tried to play the role of the head of the family's wife. The girl was surprised that they had actually managed to find out who was behind this. The man looked at her and replied that now they knew. The lady's face became serious, and she asked if the Marquis was going to go and sort out the order. As the head of the family, Agatha has the right to punish those who have disgraced the House of Arata last time they got off with exile. Now things will be much more serious. The Marquis said the journey would take 2 weeks there and back, so he would leave a carrier pigeon so that Agatha could write. Nobilis sighed and asked her fiancé to take care of himself on the journey she was sorry to have to part, but it would be better to sort this out before the honeymoon. She told him enthusiastically to get ready. After his return, a whirlwind of affairs would swirl around him, to which the Marquis, closing his eyes, replied that coming from her lips, it sounded threatening. By this time, the Marquise's valet with a list of appointments stopped nearby. Arat leaned over and touched the lady's glove with his lips. It was time for him to go. He said he would return as soon as possible. The girl, whose eyes shone even brighter in the sun, and it seemed as if lilacs had blossomed in them, carefully said that the Marquis should not overdo it. The man just thought that this seemed to be his remark. Agatha smiled and looked questioningly at the Marquis, who remained silent. But he passed her by, saying goodbye. The girl looked after him, trying to understand what had just happened. For a moment his gaze became completely alien. Agatha thought that she might have imagined it. 10 days later, Baron Deco's mansion was ablaze with the crimson colors of blood. Against the bright orange sunset, the spilled blood seemed like a disturbing stain, but without a drop of sympathy. The second deputy commander of the Order of Arata, Huber Carouan, called the master. Fear, excitement, and horror made the hearts beat wildly. The men trembled, kneeling with their hands tied, when the deputy reported that the baron's household had been taken. The broad sword with its cold blade clanged as it disappeared into its sheath with one movement of the hand. Arat turned his gaze to Huber and called his work good. The Marquis approached the traitors, who were trembling like aspen leaves in the wind, and said that he remembered that the heir to the House of Deco was the eldest son. He asked if that meant it was now the second one, and the guy, with his head down, answered the gentleman that it was definitely so. At that moment, a white bird fluttered across the sky, several light feathers fell to the ground, and all three, the Marquis, the deputy, and the assistant, raised their heads. It was a carrier pigeon from Lady Agatha. It spotted Enoch Arat and changed direction. A white bird landed on the man's hand. The Marquis took the note from the pigeon and read it immediately. A soft smile appeared on his lips. Huber, noticing that the Marquis had begun to write something down on the piece of paper, moved closer, smiling. He asked curiously what she had written. The Marquis replied that Agatha was asking him to return as soon as possible, and the deputy, unable to contain himself, burst out laughing, joking that they were like real newlyweds. The assistant sighed heavily, and the Marquis silently turned his head towards his deputy, making it clear with his gaze that he shouldn't joke like that. Carouan coughed awkwardly and asked the milord what he would do with the Deco family. The Marquis handed the note to the carrier pigeon and gave it a little push with his palm, helping it take off. He turned his head towards the tied-up boys. At that moment his blue eyes seemed darker than usual, his lips were tightly pressed together, and his gaze pierced right through them. Arat said that from that moment on the second son became the new baron, and the boy, hearing this, raised his head in fear at the Marquis, sweating profusely. The Marquis made a decision, namely, to bring the previous heir to trial. The guy was grabbed by the order and was led away. He screamed to the master, begged for mercy, but all in vain. Arat waved his hand, letting go of the object. He threw the seal of their house at the feet of his second son, now a baron. The Marquis said he hoped he would not have to return here again. He named the heir to the mansion the new Baron Decho, which made the boy's heart sink. The Baron clenched his trembling hands, tied with rope, into fists, and he promised that he would remember the master's words and would not dishonor his trust. 4 days later, the Order of Arata passed the gates of the empire's capital, Roxbad. The Marquis pulled the reins and snorted, stopping his horse. Huber stopped next to him and asked what had happened, while Arat asked how things were at the first residence. The guy replied that everything was calm there, not a single attempt at invasion. The Marquis asked if she was asleep. Huber asked again who. Then Enoch turned on his horse and said that he would go and check. Agatha sat at her desk, holding a fountain pen in her right hand, her eyes closed, her head pecking. A voice called softly to the lady, and she opened her sleepy eyes. Her assistant brought a cup of tea into the office and, putting it on the table, suggested that Nobilis take a rest. She asked in a sleepy voice what time it was. The man replied that it was 2 o'clock in the morning. Agatha pinched the bridge of her nose with her fingers and said tiredly that she would finish this part first. The assistant adjusted his glasses, asking if she was sure. The lady smiled and hummed approvingly. She asked Alan to see what the noise was outside. As the man left the office, he thought he had just been politely shown the door, and the girl sighed. The street was indeed restless. A rat was passing right under her windows. Agatha, continuing to write, thought that it had been a long time since there had been such a commotion at night. Could this really be an attack? After a while, she sorted out the papers and, having collected them in a stack, lightly tapped them on the table, aligning the sheets. Nobilis leaned back in her chair and sighed heavily, saying out loud that she was almost finished. Suddenly, a low, velvety voice said that she had told him not to work to the point of exhaustion. At this time, Enoch Arata stood in the doorway, his head slightly tilted to the side and his arms crossed over his chest. Agatha rose from her chair, asking if he had just returned. It was late at night and he needed to rest. She asked how he was feeling, and Arat looked into her eyes the whole time. He closed his eyelids and sighed, replying that everything was fine and apologizing for coming at such a late hour. Agatha allowed him in, and they sat down at a round table in the middle of the room. The girl asked if he had sorted everything out. The man said that he had completed everything cleanly and could now stay in the capital for a while. Agatha smiled. She was glad to hear it. But the question arose in her head as to why he came so late. Guesses tormented her. The man suddenly said that she began to look even paler than before his departure. Was it true that she had so much to do? Agatha looked up at him and sighed, asking if it was really that noticeable. There was indeed a lot to do, and Nobilis was not one to put things off, because if you don't resolve everything at once, everything will fall apart later. The girl thought that things are never that simple with family. Everything goes wrong. She told Arata that he was probably tired. The girl offered to walk him to the door, but the Marquis called her by name, as if interrupting. He wanted to know her schedule for tomorrow. Agatha thought that the man was wondering how things were going in his absence. When they finished talking, the Marquis was about to escort the bride to her chambers, but Agatha said that it was not worth it. She would remain in the hall. The man continued insistently that it was almost dawn now, too late for official meetings in the hall. He looked into her amethyst eyes, waiting for a reasonable answer. A blush appeared on Agatha's cheeks. Nobilis placed her hand in the Marquis's, agreeing with him. It seemed that she herself had begun to allow Enoch more, without noticing it. Later, Alan thanked the Marquis for persuading the lady to rest. They were very worried, because Agatha had not slept a wink that day. The man himself understood this perfectly well, and although the girl tried not to show it, he was sure that Agatha spent her nights without sleep. As he left the residence, the Marquis said that he was looking at the next day's to-do list and saw what he could do himself. His assistant asked if he needed to prepare a summary. The Marquis responded positively, asked him to come early in the morning and not disturb the lady. Arat also said that documents requiring a signature should be sent to him, and Alan bowed. The servant stood in bow until the Marquis mounted his horse and set off on his journey. All this time, Arat wondered why Nobilis so stubbornly continued to pull everything on herself. It seems he is beginning to understand this now. The man stopped on the road and looked up at the sky. The stars shine very brightly, joining together in a constellation of the answer that came to the man's mind. There was no one nearby on whom Agatha could rely. And until now she had been carrying everything alone, because she knew that if she didn't do it herself, no one else would. Inhaling the cool scent of the gradually fading night, the Marquis again felt the feeling of closeness that he had been experiencing all this time. When he lost his parents and found himself at war too early, Arat was exactly the same. Only he survived, became stronger, got out of that mud, and Agatha, it seems, does not realize that she does not have to pull everything alone. The man thought, riding his horse, that if he didn't know, it would be a different matter, but now that he knows, he cannot stand aside. Agatha is his future wife, and he is not so stupid as to make the same mistake. He is not an idiot anymore. Nobilis was sitting on the terrace one afternoon drinking tea when Alan approached her. Agatha took the documents in her hands, being in such a state of prostration that at that moment it seemed that anything could happen and she would not even notice. When she woke up, the lady was even confused. The room was somehow unusually fresh, and the sun was shining so brightly until Agatha realized that it was already daytime. She began to complain why no one had woken her up, since there had been so much to do in the morning, and the assistant, bowing, explained that this was a strict order from the Marquise. Enoch looked through all the papers in the morning, sorted everything carefully, and even went to the morning meeting instead of Agatha, like an engaged man. The girl put the sheets back in place, worried that her rest until noon would turn into a problem. This was unusual, and even a little awkward for her. There was a sound of hooves outside, and Alan gasped, looking up. My Lord Marquis, along with his deputy and assistant, arrived at the Nobilis residence. Arat, as always, was elegantly dressed. The clip on his black tie sparkled. Agatha rose from the table and joyfully went out to meet the groom. The man bowed and took my lady's hand. He told her that she looked much better already. The Marquis hoped that she didn't mind that he didn't wake her up. Agatha didn't deny it, because it was a concern. There was one more thing. Enoch was only concerned with what concerned the House of Nobilis and what he was allowed to do. This man never crossed the line. During the conversation, the heroine said that she would manage on her own from now on. Alan, who was handing the documents to the Marquis, and the Marquis himself, looked silently at the lady. The man turned to Nobilis and said that today she too should rest a little. He checked the hall in the morning. The preparations were going perfectly. The wine delivery was also going without a hitch. Agatha was surprised and said that this was good. The Marquis handed the bride a sheet of paper with a plan for the day, adding that she had only one thing to do today. There was one item written on the sheet, trying on a wedding dress, and this made Agatha nervous. She didn't want to seem strange, but she wanted to speak out about it. At this moment, Alan announced that Madame Salette had already arrived, and the Marquis rose from the table. Arat approached Nobilis with a request that if she allowed it, he would like to continue helping her tomorrow. Handing the brush to the man, she asked, without taking her eyes off him, if he would really come tomorrow too. Enoch had planned to stay here for a whole week. He had already made a schedule for the coming days. Agatha, confused, asked if she needed to take another vacation, to which the Marquis replied that he would gladly give her a full vacation, but checking the wedding venue was something only she could do. The heroine understood what the man was getting at. Everything that requires her personal involvement is the decoration, the menu, the wedding dress. And Enoch takes care of the rest. Agatha looked at the groom and said that she appreciated his concern. She wanted to object, but the man forestalled her objections by asking if he could invite his team to the mansion. This way she will continue working on the design, and with his support, everything will go even faster. The girl blushed with Enoch. Things really did move more easily, but delegating was still difficult. Although everything in Arata's house works smoothly and harmoniously, and his people are silent as stone, which means the time has come to trust. Looking into the Marquise's face, Nobilis caught herself thinking that she did not want to refuse, because she liked the way he took care of her. The lady agreed to let it be so, and he smiled softly, saying that he would try not to disappoint her. And so, time flew by unnoticed. The morning of the wedding day arrived. The guests gathered in the courtyard and went into the chapel. They were delighted with the architecture and color scheme of the bright hall with stained glass windows. This is exactly what they expected from Agatha Nobilis, that she would transform a small place into a whole world. The pink-haired girl looked around and said that Lady Nobilis had warned her, but it was even more beautiful here than she could have imagined. By this time, the arrival of his lordship Theodore Newt was announced. He walked slowly along the carpet with his gaze downcast. Fatigue from lack of sleep and tears was visible under his eyes in the form of redness and blueness. The ladies heard that he was not in the best condition, but they did not think that a man would look so pale. Rumor had it that only one invitation had come to Nuta's house, only for the Duke. The girls became wary, wondering if the rumors about the hard life were true. Agatha was dressed in an exquisite wedding dress that emphasized her slender figure. Her hair was braided. On her head was a tiara with a long veil attached to the back. She was dazzling. The servant told her about this, and the lady, looking back, thanked her with embarrassment. The girl informed the lady that His Majesty had arrived, and it looked like the ceremony was beginning. Agatha asked what about Enoch, but he had finished all the preparations and was already waiting. The man was also dressed in white. His neck was hugged by a starched collar and a snow-white jabot, decorated with a brooch. Finally, the orchestra began to play. First, the bows touched the strings of the violins, then the low tone of the cello came into play, and the melody spread throughout the chapel. The servant told the lady that it was time to go out, and Agatha's lips parted, her face flushed, and her heart played its concert. Finally, the day arrived. Agatha Nobilis walked towards the entrance with a slow but confident step, followed by the servants holding the hem of her long dress. She held a small bouquet of fresh roses in her hands. There had been many weddings in Agatha's life, but this was the first time her heart trembled like this. The bride entered the hall. She felt people's eyes on her, and finally her eyes rose to him. Enoch froze at the sight of Agatha. His heart almost sank into his heels from the sight of her beauty. He offered his hand in white gloves, and Agatha ran her fingers through it. After the ceremonial speech, the priest asked the young couple to exchange rings as a sign of their marriage union. Agatha felt thousands of shocks running through her body when Enoch put the ring on her. She was happy that she was marrying this man, although somewhere deep down she was still worried. But now she was truly happy, and this happiness shone through her smile and sparkling eyes. Thus, the marriage union between Enoch Aratus and Agatha Nobilis was considered concluded. His Majesty smiled and congratulated his goddaughter on her wedding. The heroine thanked the emperor, and Aratus bowed to him as a sign of gratitude. The newlyweds accepted congratulations one after another, shook hands with the guests, and smiled. A man's voice told Agatha that he had not been able to see her for a long time. His Highness extended his hand to Lady Nobilis, expressing his congratulations to her, and he gasped, saying that she was now the wife of the Marquis. The girl shook the prince's hand, who asked permission to be her second dance partner at the reception after the ceremony. Agatha frowned slightly at this proposal, since today was a wedding, not a ball, but Anthony would not ask without a reason. Therefore, Nobilis said that it was an honor for her, and she would gladly leave a second invitation for His Highness. Anxiety was growing inside me, wondering if something had happened. The Marquis approached his wife and, placing his hand on her waist, leaned towards her, saying that he wanted her to meet someone. Anthony smiled. He decided that he seemed to have kept Agatha too long, so he said that they would see each other later. The newlyweds walked through the chapel arm in arm. The guests couldn't take their eyes off them, and they were the talk of the town. Agatha visibly tensed up. She felt that something was fishy here, but she was reassured by the thought that everything would soon become clear. Now it was more important to focus on the present. The Marquis led his wife to a young girl with dark hair, who introduced herself as Aratus's sister, Isabella, who bowed and congratulated him wholeheartedly on his wedding. And, blushing a little, she added that now they were one family. Agatha shook the girl's hand, hoping that things would work out for them from now on, and Isabel said that she should have said the same. The young Marquis said that they would still have time to get to know each other better. The feast after the ceremony was magnificent, with a large banquet hall and an immeasurable amount of champagne and snacks, with music and dancing. It was a celebration for everyone who came to share the day with the newlyweds, and finally it was time for the newlyweds' first dance. Agatha changed into a more comfortable dress. She and Enoch walked to the middle of the hall and began to circle, the man confidently leading his wife, holding his hand on her waist. The girl had been the queen of the ball more than once, and her first dance was nothing new, but for some reason she was unusually nervous. so much so that it became difficult to look Enoch in the eyes, his cheeks burning with embarrassment. The man put his hand on his wife's back, hugging her, and with each such touch, Agatha's legs turned weak. His warm palm distracted the girl from her thoughts. The heroine stumbled and her foot tilted slightly to the side. Errett leaned over, clasping his wife with both arms, thus preventing her from falling. Their gazes met so close to each other that it seemed everything around froze. The hearts of the two beat a drum march from the feeling of closeness. Both felt each other's breath on their lips. Agatha looked down and the man asked if everything was okay. She didn't answer. The trembling in her body didn't subside, and the embarrassment reached her ears, so that Agatha buried her face in her husband's chest. The heroine quietly uttered words of gratitude for the concern. The Marquis did not take his eyes off her. He believed that there was nothing to be grateful for in this situation. When they finished dancing and Agatha took her husband's arm, His Highness came out to meet them. Anthony extended his hand to the young Marquise, inviting her to dance, saying that now it seemed to be his turn. Agatha accepted his invitation, replying that it was an honor for her. All the guests came out to dance. Agatha put her hand on the prince's shoulder. She kept looking back, and Anthony, noticing this, said that Agatha was tense today, which was not like her. He smirked, asking if she really liked the Marquise so much, which irritated the girl. She told the prince to stop playing with words and get down to business. Agatha asked him directly why he suddenly decided to invite her to dance, and His Highness sighed. He replied that he had heard some interesting news. While leading his dear cousin in a dance, the prince gave her an idea, namely who she thought would be Minocor's ambassador at the preliminary negotiations. Agatha stopped abruptly, realizing what Anthony was getting at. His Highness himself became serious and came a little closer to Agatha, and he said that her ex-husband would be an ambassador, which caused the Marquise's face to change. Agatha removed her hand from His Highness's shoulder and turned back. She looked up at the box in the hall where His Majesty the Emperor sat. He smiled at her, but at that moment Agatha cursed him, because it was the Emperor who would make her see the face of her ex-husband again. More than 10 years ago, the Manacor Empire was thriving, and this was where Agatha lived. She walked quickly across the courtyard, accompanied by servants, her head burning with anger. Nobilis wondered who he was when the maid hesitated to answer the question of where His Highness was. This man seemed to be dying if he didn't change women every day. It was there that she first saw this boy with light, ash-colored hair. He stood there looking straight ahead, lost in his thoughts. Agatha asked who he was, and the girl excitedly replied that he was not someone worth paying attention to. The servant added that His Highness would sort everything out himself, and it was not difficult to guess that this child was connected with Fernand. This was the last straw, and while Agatha was sitting in her study writing a letter, her husband entered uninvited. He grinned, standing in the doorway and calling his wife his young concubine. Fernand learned that Agatha had seen that boy, Adam. The prince sat down on the edge of the table, saying that he had completely forgotten to warn her not to let him catch Agatha's eye. Nobilis was silent. She smelled someone else's perfume on her husband, who slept with someone and came to her as if nothing had happened. Fernand raised his eyebrows and playfully asked Agatha not to look at him like that. A vein throbbed on the girl's face when he said that he, too, was a victim. Some beauty had fooled him and given birth to a child. Agatha asked if he was really scared, and the man replied, taking one of his wife's hands, that even now everything inside him was shaking. He pressed her palm to his chest, asking if she couldn't feel his heart pounding. Despite this apparent panic, Fernand's heart beat evenly and calmly. And at that moment something inside Agatha cracked. It was her patience. She could not bear it and wrote to His Majesty at night that she demanded a divorce. This is how her second divorce happened. Agatha closed her eyes, drowning in painful memories, and mentally told herself to calm down, because the reception was still going on. She needed to finish the evening. Having finished dancing with His Highness, she approached her husband and called out to him. The girl asked with a smile how long he had been waiting. The man took the Marquise by the hand, replying that he had just been talking with Count Terre. They say he had bred a new variety. The Count responded joyfully, pressing his hands to his heart. He would like to give it to the newlyweds for their wedding. The man enthusiastically began to explain that the grains were larger than usual and tasted sweeter, and Agatha thought that this time he was trying to strengthen the bonds with the help of the harvest. The move was banal and as old as a worn-out frock coat, but Agatha tried to keep a straight face, especially when another man approached to talk about new fabrics. Listening to them interrupting each other, Agatha giggled. The feast and dancing lasted until the day gave way to the cover of night, and then the young couple got into the carriage. Agatha looked at Enoch and, after a pause, assumed that he was very tired. But the man was sure that my lady was much more tired. She had been on her feet all day, and in those shoes too. Eret leaned forward, asking to be allowed to do this for a moment. He knelt down before the Marquise and bowed his head down. Agatha, not expecting this, looked down at him, blushing. The man gently grasped his wife's thin ankle with his fingers, and with his other hand carefully removed her shoe. The girl, frozen in place, called her husband by name, as if asking him what he was doing. The Marquise, with an imperturbable face, replied that in war fatigue was relieved like this. He skillfully massaged her foot, gently rotating his palms to relieve the tension in Agatha's legs. The girl closed her eyes. Her ears and face turned red from strange sensations, as if a flame was flaring up somewhere inside her. She felt that if she opened her mouth, something strange would burst out. The man's right hand moved higher, onto his shin. His fingers pressed lightly against the delicate skin beneath the dark blue fabric of the hem. Agatha's eyes widened, a piercing, almost painful feeling piercing her body, intensified by this touch. The girl suddenly pulled her leg away and put her hands in front of her so that the Marquis would move away. She turned away in embarrassment and said that everything was fine now, but the man noticed that her calf muscle was also cramping. Agatha looked away. Her hands were pressed tightly to her chest, her face was burning, and an electric current was piercing her body. The girl's voice sounded higher. Eret only now noticed this confusion when he looked closely at his wife. Realizing what had just happened, the man froze, feeling his body flush with heat. Ben met the young couple at the residence and bowed to his master and mistress, greeting them. The servants behind him also bowed, welcoming Agatha to the Arata family residence. The girl was pleasantly surprised by such a warm welcome and asked to take care of them, even if only for one night, and then they went inside. The newlyweds' house was still undergoing renovations, so the newlyweds would spend the night at Arata's residence. In the darkness, the corridor and walls, even the ceilings, shone with a noble dark blue color with a hint of lilac. Walking arm in arm with Enoch, Agatha looked around. It was unusual for her to spend her wedding night outside her husband's house. The man stopped in front of the door, and the Marquise turned her gaze to her. Enoch placed his hand on the door and said that Agatha would spend the night in his room. The girl didn't expect this. She thought she would be accommodated in the Marquise's chambers. Opening the door, Enoch asked if she wanted to look around. Agatha nodded shyly. Lady Arata blushed, looking curiously at Enoch's room. She looked like him, strict, clean, and to the point. The man asked the Marquise if she wanted to freshen up, and when she answered in the affirmative, Enoch asked Ben to take the lady to the bathroom. Walking down the corridor, Agatha couldn't help but say that the residence was truly beautiful. Ben replied that it was thanks to her. For before the wedding, she knew about the difficulties of Arata's house and helped with funds, which gave Agatha an idea. That's why Ben is so polite and attentive to her, because she tried for Enoch's sake. She smiled, thinking that she had received recognition from the other side as well, thanks to this. The man pointed to the entrance to the bathroom, where the girl was met by a maid. Ben said that now this was Agatha's home too. She could look around and take in the sights, and he would serve her with full dedication. The Marquise smiled, feeling the warmth of these words. The bathroom was huge, and in the warm water Agatha relaxed a little. The servants helped her wash her hair. Another girl entered with a tray in her hands. The gentleman ordered it to be served. It was cold white wine and thinly sliced meat with cheese. Cold was what Agatha needed. She took the glass of wine and took a sip. Looking out the window, the girl thought about how, according to rumors, this mansion had stood empty for more than 10 years. Now this space must be filled by her. The Marquise knelt down, turning over in the bathroom. The thought that soon everything would be here for her somehow excited her. While Agatha was taking a bath, he himself was drinking wine. He was informed that my lady had arrived. The girl came to him with damp hair and in a light nightgown, slightly covered by a transparent cape. Agatha asked how long he had been waiting for her. The man, seeing her like this, froze for a split second. He walked towards her, replying that he wouldn't have said so. The Marquis grabbed his wife by the waist and pulled her sharply towards him. In one movement, he lifted her into his arms, saying that he had not waited long. He wondered if Agatha had enjoyed the dishes he had ordered served, and the Marquise replied that everything was delicious. The man carefully laid his wife on the bed, saying that he was glad to hear it. He placed his hand next to her face on the bed. The knee followed suit. Agatha and Enoch were left alone in the room, illuminated by the cold light of the moon. Their gazes met again, Agatha's, half-languid, Arata's, piercing. The man closed the distance between them and kissed his wife on the forehead. His lips slid down to her ear, his hot breath fanning her. Agatha sighed and closed her eyes. She could not imagine that Enoch could be so persistent. The man ran his fingers through the Marquise's blonde hair, hanging over her. He said her name, filling the entire space with his voice. He ran his hand through the strands and touched my lady's cheek, which was blushing so deeply beneath him, her heart beating incredibly loudly. Enoch, placing his thumb on the girl's lips, asked if he could continue. She responded with consent, and immediately his lips lightly touched hers. His hands were careful, but surprisingly hot, and the longer he touched Agatha's body, the more ticklish and painfully sweet it became for her. On a sunny day, Prince Ferdinand set out to see His Majesty in the imperial capital of MANHWA. Entering the hall, the man bowed, asking whether his father, the sovereign, had called him. The emperor listened to his son's request and discussed it with the heir and the council. Ferdinand glanced tensely at his father, waiting for the decision to be made. The emperor gave his son permission to be a representative in these negotiations, which made Ferdinand happy. He promised to return with results worthy of trust, but the emperor first decided to give instructions, firstly, to take a competent official with him, and to take advantage of the opportunity to restore contact with the Roxbad Empire. But there was something else, something more important. The emperor, without taking his eyes off his son, said that he had to settle a long-standing feud with the heiress of the House of Nobilis. Ferdinand bowed. He understood that this was why the sovereign had allowed him to go to the negotiations. The emperor sighed, adding to himself that although he did not completely trust his son, now that relations with Nobilis have been damaged, restoring diplomacy with the Roxbad Empire, which is their homeland, will not be easy. At the moment, Roxbad's prestige is off the charts after a 10-year war and victory in it. They received new lands, ports, and huge compensation. Moreover, the young Marquise, who is called a war hero, married Agatha Nobilis. In this way, the influence of her house would only grow, which greatly irritated Emperor Meinekor. More irritation was expressed because of this idiot, who, if he had not done stupid things, then the divorce from Agatha and the conflict with Roxbad would not have happened. After a pause, the emperor asked Ferdinand how his son was, which caused the man's face to darken. He put his hand on his neck in annoyance and looked away, replying that his son, although illegitimate, was of imperial blood, and he would take care of him. The emperor hissed and sighed. He waved his hand, indicating that Ferdinand could go. The man grinned and replied that he wouldn't let him down. A pale hand pulled the dark blue curtains closed, and Ferdinand could be seen giving orders from the window. His grown son, with the same blonde hair as he, looked at his father, and there was no tenderness in that look. A pulsating vein appeared on the young man's face, and his gaze was full of hatred. At dinner, Milady was greeted by Isel Mazro, first assistant of the House of Nobilis. She asked him if the delegation list had already been approved, to which the man replied that it had not yet. Agatha's eyes flashed when she heard that the notice would arrive closer to her arrival in Saint-Honorat. The Marquise understood that His Majesty wanted her not to know until the very end that Ferdinand would be there, and she said outright that the Emperor certainly knew about her guesses. The assistant exhaled tensely. Agatha rose from the table to personally check that all the things from the Nobilis house had arrived. She thanked the assistant for his efforts. The Marquis was busy preparing for departure, asking questions about food and drinking water. There was a bustle in the yard, all the workers were busy loading, when Agatha came out to them. She walked accompanied by servants and was even a little upset not seeing Arata on the street. But as soon as she saw him, her face lit up and her cheeks turned pink. Even the maids smiled. Agatha clung to him and put her hand in the Marquise's hand. The man noticed that she was early, for there was still time before departure. Nobilis wanted to make sure that everything was prepared. She looked behind her husband and asked who was with him. Huber straightened up and, smiling, said that he was glad to meet my lady. He introduced himself as the second deputy commander of the Order of Arata and said that he would accompany them on this trip, asking for her mercy. Huber said that as soon as he learned that he was going with Milady, Leon was so envious of him that words cannot describe it. After all, he had a chance. He won the toss, 1-1, and at that moment Enoch interrupted Huber, meaningfully saying his name. Carwin objected to my lord, for he must tell what a fight he had endured to get into this detachment. Perhaps then my lady would look at him differently. Eret closed his eyes and took a deep breath, and Agatha laughed. She understood that they had spent almost 10 years at the front and were not shy about showing affection. Ben informed the gentleman and lady that everything was ready for departure. Eret asked Huber to stop chattering and organize the knights. Already sitting on his horse, the deputy commander looked back and smiled. The inspection was complete. So the Marquise, his wife, and the Order of Arata set out on a long journey. As they rode, Agatha and Enoch talked a lot about everything, but even so, the man behaved with restraint. The road was long, and the carriage drove without stopping until sunset, against which the carriage seemed even brighter. Gradually the sun sank below the horizon, and finally they arrived at the inn. The Marquise and Marchioness were silent, and Huber smiled tensely, noting that the courtyard was rather simple, but the province was the province. Enoch looked at Agatha and guessed that she might not be entirely comfortable, so he suggested that she sleep in the carriage. But the wife replied that everything was fine. She was used to the roads, and it was easier for security if she was in the room. It would be easy to post a guard. Huber was amazed, no, delighted, and Enoch narrowed his eyes softly. The deputy commander escorted Agatha to her room together with the gentleman. He said that it was the best of all. Inside, the furniture was quite simple, made of wood, but not devoid of taste. Agatha was silent, so Huber was tense, waiting for her reaction, and this mood was transmitted to Enoch. The girl smiled and thanked them for seeing her out. The lady called Jessie the servant. No words were needed for Jessie to understand what was required of her. She asked the lady to wait a minute and, entering the room, skillfully began to wield the cleaning weapon, deftly brushed away the cobwebs, wiped the dust, and made the bed. The two men stood in amazement as they watched the young girl quickly complete the cleaning, and Agatha smiled. And indeed, within a couple of minutes the room was literally shining with brilliance, and the bed looked luxurious with its red bed linen and burning candlestick. Agatha asked where Enoch's chambers were, and Huber awkwardly replied that his room was at the very end, on the right. Jessie was going there to check everything out personally, and Agatha suggested they have dinner at that time and asked if the meat should be roasted whole. Eret had no words to express how wonderful his wife was, how she revealed herself even more every time in such little things. The dinner was excellent. There was hot soup, expensive cheese, baked and dried meat on the table. The knights who sat down at the table did not begin to eat immediately. It was the first time they had seen such a luxurious dinner. They even doubted whether it was true that they could eat all of this. Agatha felt this atmosphere. Everyone was acting somehow constrained. The Marquise cut off a piece of meat and tasted it, thinking that they would soon get used to it, and she would make sure that they would continue to have enough. Night had fallen, the inn was in the forest, and a guard was stationed nearby. The smoke from the fire rose into the air, and the flames illuminated the area. It was the 6th day of the journey, and the knights dined on rich soup and sliced vegetables with sausages. The guy's mouth was watering at the sight of this tray. He said that the hostess really changed everything. Huber agreed. He speared a juicy sausage with his fork, not believing that they could eat them right on the march. At first, he only hoped that the lady would endure the journey, but it turns out that he worried in vain. The knights were amazed at how the Marquise had thought everything through. She turned out to have good endurance. Huber said with particular trepidation that they seemed to have found a true mistress. They remembered Agatha, with her kindness and sincere smile. The knights swore to be faithful to her to the end. Everything turned out as Agatha had hoped, and perhaps even more. The loyalty of the Order of Arata to their mistress became boundless. Time passed, and the 10th day of the journey arrived. At the port, Lord Marquis Erritu and Lady Agatha were greeted warmly. The couple walked arm in arm, the girl smiling, tucking her hair behind her ear, happy that they had finally arrived in the port city of Saint-Honorar. The Marquis knew that a ship from the Nobilis clan had already arrived here, and the man replied that everything was correct, and they could sail at any moment. He offered them to inspect the ship. Arat was only 4. In the crew, Agatha studied materials on the navy of the MANHWA Empire. She said she needed to check something. The Marquis asked if there was a problem, but that was not the issue. Agatha looked up at him, thinking that she should tell her husband about this in advance. The girl handed the Marquis the sheets of materials. He began to study them, and Agatha said that they said that this embassy would be accompanied by the fleet commander himself. The Marquis replied that this meant that someone of very high birth would be included in the MANHWA delegation, and Agatha sighed. She said that the second prince of the empire, Ferdinand, who was also her ex-husband, would be arriving, and Enoch's lips pressed tightly together upon hearing this. Agatha looked up at him, worried that this would make him jealous. Enoch said nothing. He looked at his wife with a restrained, even cold gaze. The man looked at the documents again and said only one thing: "That's how it is." This indifferent answer pierced Agatha with electricity. She did not expect it. And she began to think, really, what did she want anyway? After all, they had a wedding of convenience. We spent the night together, as befits newlyweds. Even if Eret was tender towards her, in the end they were just spouses, bound together by necessity. Agatha lowered her head, telling herself that she shouldn't deceive herself, how stupid it was to expect feelings from a marriage of convenience. She understood this perfectly well when suddenly the man gently touched her cheek with his finger. He put the documents aside and, leaning forward, said that Agatha didn't look well today. A rat was going to meet with the fleet representatives himself so that she could rest. Pressing her cheek against her hot palm, the Marquise replied that the journey in the carriage had apparently tired her out. She would rest a little and she would feel better. Nobilis closed her eyes, and although she understood that this was not right, she still became more greedy. At that moment she thought that if this man ever loved her, how happy she would be. After leaving the carriage, the Marquis bowed to his wife, saying goodbye to her until they met again soon. Agatha said that the commander would probably be picky about whether Eret could handle it alone, to which the man replied that he was not such a simple person. These words calmed Nobilis, even causing her face to blush a little. The carriage set off, and Enoch stood watching it go. The man understood why Agatha was acting strangely. It was all because of the second prince. It seemed like she had been watching his reaction all this time. The knight reported to the commander that preparations for sailing were complete. Enoch praised him. As the Marquis swung into the saddle, he thought that Ferdinand's arrival could not be called a pleasant event. One way or another, action had to be taken, and a rat said that they were going. Time quickly flew forward. It was the 9th day of the journey from Saint-Honorar to the island of Pahlavi. During this time, the Roxbad Empire managed to obtain a list of the members of the MANHWA delegation, and as expected, the second Prince Fernand was at its head. Agatha exhaled nervously, because Anthony's words turned out to be true in the end, and Jessie gasped, looking out from under the visor of her hand at the sea. She told the lady that the island of Pahlavi was visible ahead. Agatha, looking at the land, thought that the port currently had only 3 operating berths, the rest were under construction. She asked the assistant when the work on the berths would be completed, and Esel said that they planned to finish it within 2 weeks. The trading post building was now being roofed over, and Agatha said that they would immediately go and have a look around. The Marquis approached his wife from behind, almost right up to her, put his hand on her stomach, and, gently taking her palm with his other hand, asked if she was really going to go straight to the construction site. Agatha's ears turned red. Enoch frightened her. She replied that she wanted to prepare everything in advance, before the delegation arrived. My lord turned to Knight Chad, who immediately replied that the delegation would arrive within 3 days. Scouts reported seeing the imperial flag on the warship. Agatha became nervous, because they arrived faster than she expected, and there would be very little time to prepare. The Marquis, noticing his wife's tense face again, leaned toward her and tenderly pronounced her name. Nobilis turned to him, their faces remaining a couple of centimeters apart. Enoch asked the Marquise for permission to help her. Agatha moved away sheepishly, saying that everything was fine, since the local manager had already prepared the main things. It was Arata who would have to go out to sea to meet the second prince, but the man replied that he had constantly dealt with embassies during the war, so this was normal for him. The Marquise said with a blush that did not fade on her cheeks that she was calm. He was nearby, so experienced. A couple of hours later, the ship docked at the island of Pahlavi, and knights greeted them at the port. And with them is the manager of the Nobilis family, Phil Butler. This fair-haired man with brown eyes and small wrinkles around his eyes bowed to the mistress and master, smiling. Agatha was glad to see the manager, although she received his reports every year, but this was the first time she had come here in person since her coming-of-age ceremony. She looked away and chuckled thoughtfully, adding that the management here was at the proper level. For Phil Butler, not being the manager, there could not have been a better compliment. He was delighted and sheepishly thanked my lady. Agatha said that she would inspect the construction site and head to the castle. Enoch said that he would join her soon as he spoke with the representatives of the fleet. Instead of a carriage, the manager prepared a horse. It seemed to him that Agatha would want to inspect the worksite as soon as possible. Nobilis walked up to the horse and placed her hands near the saddle, her face tense. Something went wrong and the girl looked down. She accidentally stepped on the hem of her dress. Strong arms wrapped around her waist to keep her from falling. The Marquis lifted his wife in one movement, as if he were holding a feather in his hands, and he sat her down on the saddle. He said that if he had known that this would happen, he would have ordered an Amazon to be prepared for riding. Blushing, Agatha said that it was okay. She didn't have long to go. Jessie asked Milady what happened to her son Umbrella, to which Agatha tensely replied that she definitely couldn't get into the saddle with an umbrella in her hands. The Marquis called Huber. He handed him an umbrella and said that the sun was scorching. That's why he gave the order not to leave Agatha's side even for a step. The girl gripped the reins with her reddened hands, and a pleasant warmth spread through her body at the thought that it was not entirely the husband's responsibility to ensure that his wife was not overheated. The Marquis kissed Agatha on the hand, telling her to return carefully. Nobilis's golden strands fluttered in the air, and the rustling of her dress could be heard. She leaned forward and touched the Marquis's cheek with a kiss. Almost at his very lips, it was an uncontrollable impulse of tenderness, and the thought flashed through Agatha's head that she could not help but love a man who was so attentive to her. Enoch's eyes widened, and he stood frozen as thousands of little fireworks exploded inside him. The girl pulled back, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, and with a flushed face said that they would see each other later. Agatha went to the construction site on Pahlavi Island and learned that they were expanding it so that up to 10 ships could dock at the same time. Agatha asked Phil Butler if it would be over in 2 weeks, to which he replied positively and suggested looking at other places. He and the manager were leisurely inspecting the progress of the work on horseback. Huber was sitting not far from Agatha, holding the lady's umbrella. The Marquise turned her gaze with genuine interest to where the manager pointed. When the inspection was over, Agatha pushed her long hair off her shoulders because of the heat and said that she liked everything. Now it was time to go back. Ezel Masro's assistant informed the lady that the delegation would arrive in 3 days. Agatha chuckled thoughtfully, raising her head to the corridor. The delegation's negotiations will take place in the castle itself, and even a cursory glance is enough to understand that, compared to the capital, everything here is far behind the latest trends. But there is almost no time to redo everything properly, so you will have to set priorities and focus on the main thing. Agatha asked Sir Huber to take the knights and conduct a security check, and at the same time check the deployment of soldiers in the castle before her husband arrived. The deputy commander pressed his fist to his chest, replying that he obeyed. Agatha told Jessie's assistant, servants, and manager that during this time they would be busy decorating the second prince's room and the reception hall. After some time, everything around was completely transformed. A red carpet appeared on the stairs, dark curtains were replaced by light ones, adding space and light, and paintings appeared. Agatha smiled, looking at the changes from the side, because in this form there would definitely be nothing to find fault with. The knight called out to Milady cautiously. He reported that my Lord Marquis had already arrived at the castle gates. Enoch's gaze entering the hall first fell on his wife. She greeted him with a smile on her face and shining eyes in that soft squint of her eyelashes, asking if he had already returned. The Marquis could not help but notice how light and clean the room was, and at that moment Agatha seemed to him like a flower that brings spring wherever she is. Coming down the stairs, the girl looked at her husband and began to wonder why he was silent, whether she had really given in to her feelings too much when she kissed him goodbye. Agatha smiled, realizing that she had run away immediately after the kiss, so Enoch, of course, could have been confused. But there was no coldness emanating from the man. On the contrary, his gaze was soft and could not tear itself away from his wife. He touched the edge of Agatha's ear with his fingers. and leaning over, he whispered directly into him that he had returned. After this, Enoch slowly drew out the word "milady" in his velvety, low voice, which vibrated, causing goosebumps on the body. Agatha, although she was lost for a moment, raised her joyful eyes to him and told him to quickly pass. The man's lips parted, and he froze every time he saw that sincere smile and the sparkle in Agatha's eyes. His wife assumed he was tired, so she told Arata to rest in the room while she ordered dinner to be served, suddenly remembering that they would have to share one bedroom today. The girl asked if he was okay with it, to which Enoch extended his hand to his wife, replying that if it didn't cause her any inconvenience, he wouldn't mind sleeping together, and it would probably be safer this way. Agatha put her hand in his and agreed, saying that she would tell the butler to arrange everything. During the negotiations, it was discussed that the mission included members of the imperial family, so the reception should be held in accordance with all the rules. Isel Masro suggested placing sculptures along the stairs and rolling out a red carpet, which would comply with minimal protocol. Next came a discussion of the cuisine. Eastern dishes were offered, and Agatha turned her gaze to the window. She didn't notice when it had gotten so dark a lot of time had passed in all this hustle and bustle. The girl closed her eyes, wondering if Enoch was waiting for her, and said out loud that those gathered would benefit from a little rest. Walking down the corridor, the Marquise noticed that the light was on in the room. Had Enoch really been waiting for her all this time? Agatha felt a flush of heat and wondered if her hair was in order. The girl was in such a hurry that she was afraid that her hair would get disheveled, but suddenly Arad appeared in front of her. His hair was unstyled, his half-naked body was covered by a robe. The man said that he felt someone coming. Agatha blushed. Her gaze involuntarily fell on his torso, covered with a light fabric. She apologized. She should have sent a note that she would be late. The Marquis smelled pleasant, as if he had just taken a bath. His hand fell on his wife's waist and pulled her towards him. Enoch dragged Agatha into the room and quickly closed the door behind him without removing his hand from her, thereby unwittingly trapping the Marquise. The man came closer to her face and lightly touched Nobilis's cheeks with his fingers, noticing how red they were. Her body was burning, and he asked if she was sick from constantly straining herself. Agatha turned her head, replying that everything was fine. She had just come here in a hurry. Her heart was pounding so loudly that she thought Enoch must have heard it. Agatha pushed the man away from her, saying that she needed to go to a meeting. Opening the door, the girl quickly added that he should go to bed without her, and even if she wasn't there in the morning, he should definitely have breakfast. The blue door slammed in the man's face before he could properly answer. Arad ruffled his hair with his hand and exhaled loudly, deciding that he had apparently frightened Agatha too much. 3 days passed. The ships of the MANHWA Empire glided quickly over the waves. A favorable wind drove the white masts, and seagulls screamed above them. Their red flag flew from the top of the mast, letting the island know who was coming to visit them. Isel told my lady that they were approaching, but Agatha saw. She was tense, thinking that she should have gone with Enoch, although it was quite logical that the commander of the army went to accompany Fernand. And yet, whether it was right to let them meet earlier, Agatha hoped that Fernand had not started talking nonsense. The Marquise was pulled out of her thoughts by a loud, familiar voice calling her by name. Fernand Mainucanti himself waved to her from the deck. The ships docked, and the second prince of the empire descended the stairs. Everyone, including Agatha, bowed to him. The Marquise humbly greeted His Highness. The man put his palms forward, asking forgiveness for his manners. He was too happy to meet. Fernand bowed and took Agatha's hand, expressing gratitude to her for the warm welcome. Enoch took notice of this. His Highness's lips barely touched the Marquise's hand. His red eyes glanced at her, and his voice playfully called her "milady." Arad, who was watching this, flashed a cold gaze, and a vein began to pulse in his jaw. Agatha suggested limiting themselves to dinner at the castle and resting after the long journey today, and starting tomorrow she asked the prince to inspect the island and begin negotiations. Fernand smiled, agreeing to do as the lady suggested, and asked permission to accompany her to the castle. Agatha tried to remain composed, her gaze falling on His Highness's hand. And then she looked away at her husband. At this time, Enoch had his back turned to her, giving orders to his deputy. Agatha seemed to confirm that the Marquis had no reason to worry about her and Fernand. When His Highness climbed into the carriage, the Marquise announced that she would travel in a separate carriage. Fernand was surprised, but Agatha only added that the servants would accompany him. The man leaned forward with a smirk on his lips, saying that it wasn't necessary, he was offering to go together. His Highness extended his hand to her, saying that they hadn't seen each other for so long. It would be nice to chat on the way, and besides, he had questions about the negotiations. Agatha's eyebrows drew together, her gaze betraying irritation, but she couldn't say it directly. Nobilis would have gladly refused, but there were too many eyes on them right now, so she told Marie that she would ride with her in the carriage. Fernando didn't seem to like it very much. One way or another, the three of them set off on their journey. Agatha and the servant Marie sat next to each other, His Highness opposite. The man crossed his legs and folded his hands on them, asking if Agatha would call him His Highness, even if there was no one else there. The girl did not answer at once, and Fernand called her familiarly by name, but the Marquise sharply asked him not to call her that, because she is the goddaughter of His Majesty Emperor Roxbad, the heiress of the ducal house of Nobilis and the mistress of the house of the Marquis of Arata. And now she was also an ambassador representing the empire, so the Marquise insisted on maintaining propriety, and Fernand replied that he understood. Although not without tension, the man closed his eyes and thought that calling Agatha simply Milady, without the Marquis, was also not bad. He smirked at the thought that it sounded much closer than B's official title. His Highness inquired how Agatha was doing, and after her dry answer, asked whether she had not been too hasty with the marriage, to which the Marquise replied that he was well informed about the affairs of the empire. Fernand replied that it was his wife's country, and Agatha said that he was too interested in his ex-wife's country, as if emphasizing the distance. The prince's eyebrows arched, and he called the Marquise by name in disappointment. Nobilis's nerves were on edge. She asked to be called the young Marquise. As far as he should know, she had just gotten married a month ago, when suddenly Huber knocked on the carriage door. They had arrived. Approaching the exit, Agatha calmed Fernand with a cold look and asked him to refrain from any actions that could cause misunderstanding. Enoch was waiting for Milady in the courtyard, his gaze meeting Agatha's. The man asked if she had explained the further schedule to His Highness. Agatha replied that they had agreed to meet in the evening in the banquet hall. Taking the Marquise by the arm, Nobilis clarified that nothing had happened when he went out to accompany the prince, and Arat calmly replied that no. Agatha felt relieved when her husband shared that Fernand had not been particularly happy to see him, but that this had not prevented him from fulfilling his duty. The girl asked the Marquis to ignore the prince's reaction. He was simply tormented by the fact that he had lost the heiress of the House of Nobilis so late. Although this was bitter, Agatha chose to look at the positive side of things, saying that the prince might use this to his advantage in negotiations. The girl forced a tense smile, adding that she was glad that he didn't suspect her of anything. At this moment, my lady was called by her assistant. Agatha gasped and, turning to her husband, announced that she needed to check on the preparations for the evening banquet. The heroine did not hear the answer and hurried to get down to business. Arat told her after she left that it was all a misunderstanding. In Agatha's chambers, servants often helped their mistress with her hair or makeup, and she was told that His Highness was asking to be allowed to accompany her. Agatha turned towards the door with displeasure, asking again. She was angry that this idiot didn't even pay attention to her words. She asked to tell him that she already had an agreement. Nobilis sat on the sofa, soaking her feet in a small bath of rose petals, wondering if the Emperor had given Ferdinand some special order. Otherwise, why was he behaving like this? Or maybe he really did still have feelings for her. Agatha was worried that this might lead to new problems. Agatha immediately perked up when she was informed that my Lord Marquis was here. She asked to be taken inside quickly, and a couple of minutes later, Arat entered the room with the knight. Agatha stood behind a transparent pinkish curtain, adjusting her light hair. She asked the Marquis to wait a minute. Enoch, seeing his wife in this state, with the sleeve of her dress lowered, stopped. The young Marquise glanced at him through a gap in the curtains and said that she had been delayed in preparing because she had been busy with the reception. Without taking his eyes off his wife, Enoch turned to John. He ordered him to wait outside, and before the boy could understand anything, he was outside the door. Agatha changed into a light blue dress and, coming out from behind the screen, apologized to the Marquise for keeping him waiting. She asked him if it would be okay when he looked down at the hem of her dress. The man said only one word, his hand, and extended his to her. Milady slid her fingers over Arata's palm, and they, together with Huber, the assistant, and the others, headed down the corridor towards the meeting. Agatha asked her assistant over her shoulder, what about the second prince it turned out that he had just left with the MANHWA delegation? The heroine tensed up unnoticed, because if they were unlucky, they might collide before they even entered the hall. Enoch walked forward confidently, tension visible in Agatha's pressed lips as footsteps were heard in the hallway. His Highness Fernand turned away at this time, and yet they collided. Prince Manacora made a face of disappointment, because Milady had refused his escort in order to come with the Marquise. Arat clenched his hand into a fist. Agatha felt his muscles tense and looked at him. The girl saw the Marquis like this for the first time. His face was gloomy, his gaze piercing and cold, and a vein of tension stood out on his face. Agatha looked down at the floor, having just realized that the second prince still bothered him more than the Marquis let on. The lady replied that her husband was by her side, so she could not burden his highness with her company. Holding her fingers on her husband's tense hand, Agatha wondered if he was irritated by the very existence of her ex-husband, or if it was jealousy. Whatever it was, for the Marquise it felt much better than indifference. She pointed her hand towards the door, inviting the prince to come inside. They had prepared special dishes for today's reception, and Fernand, looking at the Marquis with disdain, replied that he was looking forward to it. At dinner, His Highness proposed a toast to the eternal union of Manacor and Roxbad. The man from Minacor's side noticed that the Marquise had put a lot of effort into this reception. One glance at the menu was enough. Agatha laughed, replying that he was overpraising her. She only did what she had to. The Marquise placed her palm over her husband's clenched hand. She added that the fact that her husband personally met the delegation allowed her to calmly focus on preparations. Smiling, Agatha asked Enoch if it was true, and he said that he was only doing his duty. He was only glad if this helped Agatha, and all these pleasantries caused discontent in Fernanda. He thought about the Marquis. What an impudent man. It irritated him that some pathetic Marquis dared to take a seat next to Agatha Nobilis. Even if he is a war hero, even if he has managed to achieve a little fame, he still cannot be better than Prince Manacor. This situation caused such acrid feelings in Fernand's soul that his body began to tremble with anger. He seemed to be planning to bore a hole into the Marquis, whose family was in financial disarray and whose relatives were nothing but problems. His Highness was aware of the rumors that this man had cleaned everything up after returning from the front, but he hardly had time to pull out the roots. Unable to contain himself, Fernand told Agatha directly that no matter how you look at it, he was still better than her. His Highness, not hearing an answer, repeated his question, calling the Marquise by name. Agatha reminded the prince that she had already told him not to do things that could be misunderstood, but Fernand interrupted her, saying that he had regretted divorcing her for many years. Arat, who had remained silent until this moment, asked His Highness if he was now challenging him to a duel. The Marquise felt her husband's hand take hold of her wrist. The man brought Agatha's hand closer to his face, saying that just like that, in front of everyone, at an official reception, Fernand had just announced that he desired his wife. Prince Ferdinand was dumbfounded, and such a tense atmosphere began to hang in the air that the delegation fell silent. Enoch, touching the Marquise's hand with his lips, did not take his darkened gaze off His Highness, to whom he said that he would gladly cross blades with him. Agatha shuddered. She was so shocked by her husband's reaction that for a moment she was speechless. Fernand was sweating. He sat with his eyes wide open, unable to even make a sound. This tension was transmitted to the others, and negotiations were interrupted. The prince, placing his hand on his chest, noted, not without malice, that the Marquis had misunderstood his words. Fernand said that was not what he meant at all. Under his long, cold gaze, the man could not stand it and lowered his eyes, mentally cursing. The prince rose abruptly from the table and, without saying anything, headed for the exit. The delegation simultaneously had one thought: what a madman. The man with the jabot rose above the table and bowed, asking to be allowed to apologize for the prince's rudeness. Sweating, he said that His Highness was apparently very tired, so the Count asked to be lenient about this. The Marquis said that the Count had no reason to apologize. He turned his gaze to the door, and he said that this should never happen again. Enoch and Agatha left the hall a couple of minutes after the incident, the man walking ahead, leading his wife behind him. The girl quickly moved her legs after him. Rustling her dress on the floor, she breathlessly called the Marquis by name, and he said that he was not thinking anything unnecessary at all. He turned Agatha's back to the door and, placing his fist on the surface, leaned towards her. The Marquis placed his thumb on her lower lip and breathed into her lips that it still bothered him. He just couldn't stand it. He pressed his lips to Nobilis's, drawing her into a kiss. Agatha responded to her husband's heated kiss, mumbling something. Enoch pulled my lady closer to him by the waist. He grabbed her with both hands and lifted her up. Agatha put her hands on his shoulders. Their gazes met. Looking the Marquise in the eyes, Arat asked her not to be left alone with the prince, to which the girl replied that they had never been alone together. Carrying his wife to the bed, the Marquis objected that she had boarded the prince's carriage, but Agatha said that Marie was with them, and then it wasn't her husband who was next to her. Arat carefully sat his wife down on the soft bed. Leaning towards her, he said that he thought that at least until this moment he would be able to control himself. He moved closer to her face again, breaking the distance between them, and quietly said that he couldn't do this anymore. Their lips met in a sweet kiss. Even more heated than before, Agatha's face was burning. The Marquis leaned forward, thereby tilting the Marquise towards the pillow. They fell onto the bed. The sweet scent of Nobilis was driving him crazy at that moment. Enoch grabbed his wife's wrists on both sides of the bed and touched her neck with his hot lips. A strong hand slid under the hem of the dress, grasping the Marquise's leg and lifting it slightly upward. Looking into Agatha's eyes, Enoch asked her permission to hug her. The Marquise ran her finger over the Marquise's lips, and she said, smiling, that there was no need to ask about such things. After all, they were husband and wife, and from these words spoken by her, the Marquise's cheeks turned red. The prince slammed the bottle of wine down on the table. This was the fourth in a row. Fernand leaned over the table and said that the Marquis was simply lucky to get Agatha, and he still dared to push him against the wall. Suddenly he jumped up and shouted for more wine. The valets became alarmed and began to tell His Highness that he needed to think about his health. Clutching a bottle of alcohol, Fernand leaned back on the sofa, indignant at how the Marquis dared. His face was burning, his tongue was slurred, but he continued to repeat this phrase. He was puffing with anger, calling Agatha's husband a lowly upstart, nothing more. Fernand gritted his teeth, muttering that it was precisely this insignificant type who was now next to Agatha. He remembered how she had looked at him that time in the carriage and told him to refrain from doing anything that would cause misunderstanding. His Highness rose abruptly from the sofa, and the valets who were watching him tensed up. Fernand said that he needed to sort out the misunderstanding between him and Agatha. He was sure that when she realized how he felt, she would leave this guy and come back to him. The guys looked at each other, realizing the criticality of the situation. They simultaneously thought that they needed to stop him, and immediately ran up to the prince, offering him more wine, even taking one good bottle. But Fernand was adamant. He opened the doors, declaring that he would go to Agatha right away. Enoch, Arata, and the young Marquise were sleeping at this time. The heroine fell asleep on the man's shoulder. A sharp sound was heard in the corridor, and Arat opened his eyes. He left the room. Huber tensed up when he saw that the gentleman had woken up. The Marquis, standing in his robe, asked what all the noise was about. Huber looked away, wondering how to explain to the gentleman what was going on, and after a pause, said that His Highness was now in the corridor. They tried to hold him back, but he waved his elbows and shouted at them to get out of the way. Several knights could barely cope with the drunken prince as they tried not to harm him. Arat heard Fernand shout that he himself must tell Agatha what he wanted to say. He called her to come out for a minute, and the knights instantly turned pale. The Marquis chuckled, his patience up to this point hanging on by a thin rope, but this was already crossing all boundaries. Looking at the door leading to the corridor, a man with a heavy aura filling the space called Fernand an impudent man. The doors swung open and everyone, including His Highness, froze. The drunk man's eyebrows rose in surprise, anger rose in his throat. He shouted why Arat was leaving Agatha's room. The Marquis stood opposite Fernand and silently looked him straight in the eyes. His Highness pointed his finger at Enoch. His body began to tremble with anger. Arat remained silent. He understood that it would be impossible to have a normal conversation with a drunken madman. His cold gaze turned to the Knights of Minotaur. He asked what they were doing here, whether all they did was watch while His Highness was coming here. The man said in a low, rough voice, "They don't think that blindly following any order is loyalty." There was a moment of silence, the kind that usually occurs when a father has caught his children in the act of doing something bad, but Fernand began calling Agatha again. It was not just a cry, but hysteria, a demand. Arat approached His Highness and put his hand on his shoulder. Fernand looked at the Marquis with clouded eyes, and he suddenly twisted his arm behind his back and turned him in the opposite direction, covering the prince's mouth with his palm, and said that he would take him there. The knight exclaimed how the Marquis dared to treat His Highness in this way. Then Arat asked if the sir would in that case personally escort the prince to the bedroom. The knight hesitated, and the Marquis gave him a look that could have caused panic. Arat said that if he was not confident in himself, he should step aside. Fernand mumbled loudly, trying to say something, but the Marquis pressed his hand tightly to his mouth. He said that he himself would take His Highness to the chambers. Tension appeared on Fernand's face, which was red either from alcohol or from anger. When they found themselves in the room, the prince hesitantly asked the Marquis if he had gone mad. Fernand's arm was aching with pain, and he asked indignantly how Arat dared to drag him here like that. Enoch calmly replied that His Highness had completely lost his composure. He took a few steps towards Fernand, saying that he had appeared in the middle of the night in the bedroom of a noble lady, and standing before the prince he asked how he should understand his actions. The Marquis placed his hand on His Highness's shoulder, and without taking his eyes off him, said bluntly that he was extremely displeased with the interest Fernand was showing in his wife. Arat asked not to show interest in Agatha. It was easier for him to speak with a sword than with words, and Fernand, looking at him from under his brows, asked if the Marquis was threatening him now. The Marquis replied that this was not a threat, but a warning, and Ferdinand would have to bear the consequences. Enoch advised him to think carefully about how he would act from now on, and His Highness looked down. He clenched his teeth, but began to understand the seriousness of it. After a tense conversation, the Marquis returned to the room, but as soon as he opened the door, he stopped for a second when he saw Agatha. She was not sleeping. The man asked if he had woken her up, but Nobilis said that it was because of Fernand. He had made the noise. The Marquis sat down next to her on the bed, saying that he wanted to sort things out without waking her, but it seemed that didn't work. The heroine asked her husband not to say that. She gently touched his cheek with her hand, adding that he already does more than enough for her. Agatha said that in the 10 years that she and Fernand had not seen each other, he had become even more stupid, but the Marquis did not consider him stupid, but rather pathetic. Enoch said that he personally escorted him to the room. The girl asked if something else had happened, but the man, touching his wife's hand with his lips, answered that no. The Marquis placed his hand on Agatha's thigh and tenderly kissed her on the cheek. He gently pushed her onto the bed, saying that everything had already been settled, so the Marquise should not worry. The heroine sighed heavily and turned to the man. She said that when they returned, she would certainly receive a reward from His Majesty. Arat placed his hand on the Marquise's head, pulling her closer to him, and quietly told her to do as she saw fit. The next day, negotiations with the MANHWA delegation resumed. The discussion was about high duties on goods, and a proposal was put forward to reduce the duty rate and increase trade. Agatha took a cup of tea and took a sip, periodically plunging into thought. She noticed that Fernand was behaving unusually today. He was rather quiet. You couldn't tell from his expression that he was even a little remorseful. Could he really have decided to behave calmly? Agatha became curious about what had happened last night, and she didn't notice how another day had passed. When it got dark, she put the documents away and announced that they would stop for today and continue the discussion tomorrow. Fernand was the first to rise from the table. The delegation, just like yesterday, looked at him tensely, but he didn't say anything. He just silently left the room. Covering her mouth with papers, Agatha whispered to her husband the question of what had happened yesterday, since Fernand was behaving suspiciously exemplarily. The Marquis whispered that he had already said that he had settled everything, but Agatha did not think that this meant exactly that decision. The man offered his hand to my lady, asking if he had helped her. A light blush shone on the heroine's cheeks. She looked at Arata with her large amethyst eyes. The lady placed her hand in her husband's and replied that he had been a great help. When the most problematic participant, Fernand, unexpectedly came forward, the negotiations ended surprisingly quickly. The discussion is over. All that remains is to check all the points of the agreement and sign them. The Nobilis family received huge port dues, rent for the buildings, and, in addition, control over the new trading hub. The MANHWA Empire, however, limited itself to a moderate fee for the use of sea routes and a one-time payment, receiving only the right of priority trade corridor. No matter how you look at it, the winner in this agreement was the Nobilis house. So, having completed the entire program, Agatha and Enoch enjoyed a 2-month honeymoon and returned back to the capital. In the Roxbad Empire, the first residence of the Nobilis, the Marquis and his wife were walking down the corridor. Agatha asked Enoch if they had the day off tomorrow, and he said yes, asking if she wanted to do anything. The heroine smiled. So the couple went to Lady Salette's studio. The hostess greeted Lady Agatha joyfully when she heard that the Marquise would be arriving today, but she politely dismissed all the other clients. Nobilis came with Aratus. She replied that there was no need to bother so much. Lady Saleh said that it was not acceptable to greet a distinguished guest in such a haphazard manner, and she invited him to go into the studio. The hostess prepared everything in advance so that the Marquise could look at it and choose according to her taste. Lady Salette heard that Lady Agatha had brilliantly completed the informal negotiations with the MANHWA Empire, and they say that His Majesty is throwing a lavish ball in her honor. Agatha noted that news travels fast with a lady, and then said that she wanted to order a few new outfits for the fall season at the same time. The owner of the studio laid out the most popular fabrics of the season on the table in front of the awning. Agatha's gaze fell on 2 types of flowers, brown with dark patterns and yellow, pink, and turquoise stripes. She picked up the dark fabric, thinking that there was something strange about it. Light, fresh colors were usually in fashion at this time of year. Lady Nobilis asked if anything had happened in the capital while she was away. Salette agreed that this brown color is a bit heavy, but it is a new product that just arrived today from the Noda trading house. Agatha's eyes widened and she froze for a moment at the mention of this family. This meant that the ladies of the Nuda house would soon return to high society. The girl silently looked at the dark fabric. This truly reflected the taste of the former Duchess Nuta. As befits a signature product of the trading house, the fabric was, of course, luxurious, but Agatha put it aside, deciding that it was not suitable for a young aristocrat. The lady pointed her finger at the fabric that lay beneath them. It was a soft pink color with light, almost transparent patterns. Agatha asked Enoch for his opinion, and he agreed that it looked good. The lady was fired up by the idea and tried a piece of fabric on her husband's face. She then did the same with blue fabric in different shades, saying that it would also go well together. But the choice still fell on pink. Enoch took the fabric in his hands and said that it would suit my lady perfectly. He placed the cloth on Agatha, smiling slightly. Nobilis blushed. She was pleased by her husband's participation in such seemingly feminine concerns. She smiled and said that if she took this fabric, she could match her outfit and his tie in the same color. It would be very beautiful. The Marquis was all for it, and Agatha suggested wearing exactly this to the next ball at the palace. Lady Saleh brought the sketch to the Marquise, and a few moments later, Agatha was already rustling in a dress made from the fabric she had chosen. Nobilis spun around the room, asking her husband's opinion. He, also wearing a new tie, froze. Seeing such beauty on Agatha, it seemed as if this color not only emphasized her figure, but was created for her. The couple both appreciated each other's appearance, and Lady Saleh and her assistants could not contain their admiration. Standing in front of the mirror, Agatha thought that at the palace ball, it would probably immediately become clear to everyone that they were a couple in matching outfits. The Marquis looked at his wife. On her open, thin shoulders and small neckline, which in this color of fabric emphasized the noble color of her skin. He leaned towards his wife, offering to put a shawl or cape on top. Agatha was surprised and wondered why this had happened. Enoch carefully hugged his wife, holding his hand on her stomach. The girl said that a cloak would not go with this dress at all, but a shawl would be possible. Enoch kept his gaze on his wife's bare shoulders. He said that she would be cold, but Agatha objected that it was summer now. Then the Marquise said that they would go at night, and Nobilis became thoughtful. Of course, the ball at the palace will take place at the very end of summer, but it shouldn't be cold. Agatha laughed and replied that they will be indoors. The Marquise gently took his wife's hand and kissed her fingers, agreeing that it should be as she decided. An urgent dispatch arrived from the palace last night. Agatha and Enoch learned that His Majesty was calling his goddaughter to him, and so their vacation ended. The audience was scheduled for noon. The man told his wife that when the audience was over, he would come for her. He invited Agatha to have lunch together, and the girl agreed with great pleasure, saying that as soon as everything was over, she would send a dispatch. As she prepared to meet His Majesty, the heroine thought that she and Enoch seemed to have become closer lately. They still shared one room, and even when Arata had business, they always ate together. Every day brought the lady so much happiness. When the preparations were finished, the girls asked Agatha how she liked Lady Nobilis, thanking the servants for their efforts. The heroine glanced at her watch. They finished just in time. It's time to move forward slowly. At the palace, Agatha was greeted with all due propriety. She was bowed to at every entrance. She greeted the son of the empire, and His Majesty, sitting on the throne, told Agatha to pass already. The emperor pointed to a table with refreshments for his goddaughter, inviting her to sit there. They sat in silence for a while. Agatha drank tea, and His Majesty looked at his goddaughter, not knowing where to begin. Finally, he made up his mind. The emperor said tensely that he had already heard the news. The second prince of MANHWA had allowed himself to be rude to Agatha. The heroine answered His Majesty without hiding anything, that this was indeed the case. The emperor chuckled, looking down, considering his previous decisions. Agatha sipped her tea calmly, noticing that His Majesty looked frankly embarrassed. However, with this meeting, he wanted to cover up long-standing differences and show that relations between the two empires had been restored. Who could have imagined that someone would burst into the bedroom of a noble lady without any permission? As soon as Agatha remembered this, anger took hold again. The emperor, sweating, asked his goddaughter if she knew that he was throwing a lavish ball in memory of the successfully concluded unofficial negotiations. Even without an official announcement, it would be clear to everyone that this reception was arranged for her and the Marquise's sake. These words were tantamount to a request to stop being angry, but Agatha did not give in. She calmly said that His Majesty's personality was as boundless as the sea. Then the emperor began to wave his arms vigorously, deciding to act differently, and reminded her that in honor of Agatha's 7th marriage, he had granted her 500,000 gold coins, and that for exemplary execution of the order, he would grant her more. Nobilis replied that she wanted to give this money as a reward to the knights who accompanied her. They worked until late at night, so they will be happy. His Majesty was ready to burst into tears at these words. His goddaughter is adamant. The emperor shared that today he personally seated Marquise Arata, who was attending the meeting for the first time, in a place of honor. Essentially in the front row where the ministers sit. Agatha placed the cup on a small plate, and turning her head towards the emperor, asked, as if guessing that he had seated Enoch on the edge of the front row. His Majesty turned pale, and he exclaimed indignantly and childishly sincerely that he had seated the Marquise in the very center. With Enoch's current position, he was already entitled to the front row, but what is important is that the emperor himself seated him in the center, a place in the center, a position with very significant symbolic significance. A place in the center signifies high status at court. The emperor shared that on every issue raised at the morning council today, he always asked the Marquise's opinion. Agatha asked what else besides that. His Majesty, after thinking, replied that it would be possible to grant Marquise Arata tax breaks on his current holdings. Smiling, the goddaughter said that His Majesty had forgotten one thing. The emperor froze, and he asked what she meant. The smile disappeared from Agatha's face, and she looked intently at His Majesty. And she asked if he would also send her to similar negotiations next time, to the very reception where her ex-husband would appear. Agatha suggested that since they had concluded an informal agreement on Pahlavi Island, the MANHWA Empire would likely send an official delegation this fall. In order to officially announce the agreement and prove that the relationship between the two empires is truly strong, Agatha appealed to the emperor with a request not to force her to go out to this delegation anymore. His Majesty objected that the Empire of MANHWA would be waiting for her to meet them. The heroine cast a warning glance at the emperor. He gasped, understanding everything at once, and instead he asked her to be sure to come to the ball in honor of the delegation, because if she avoided even that, the MANHWA Empire would misunderstand them. Agatha sighed, replying that if the emperor was asking so, she could no longer refuse. She would come with her husband. His Majesty felt relieved and leaned his back against the chair. Relaxing, he noticed that his goddaughter had the right character. Although the godfather also has the right to make a mistake at least once, Agatha did not respond to this, but thought about what he was going to do if he made a mistake a second time. The heroine said that if His Majesty had at least shown her the list of delegation members in advance, it would not have come to this. The emperor asked if it was true. Agatha silently took a sip of tea, closing her eyes. The godfather sighed and said that it would be as she wanted. Let Agatha think that this time he had missed. So he admitted his guilt, and they moved on to the next topic. The emperor asked how Agatha was enjoying the island of Pahlavi, and a smile lit up the girl's face. She really liked him. His Majesty invited his goddaughter to dine together today. This had not happened for a long time, and he wanted to hear how Agatha liked her new possessions and the island. Agatha thought about it. She promised to have lunch with the Marquis. However, to maintain decorum, the girl asked if her husband could join them. A dinner with the emperor would also benefit Enoch's position. Agatha said that through her husband, the emperor would hear a much more useful story, to which His Majesty agreed. That day, the dinner lasted no less than 3 hours, and as a result, Enoch's position at court rose even higher. A month later, a ball was held in the palace in honor of the unofficially concluded treaty with the MANHWA Empire. The nobility had already gathered in the hall. They were talking among themselves and greeting others, when suddenly they announced His Grace, the Marquis of Arata and the young Marquis of Arata. The guests fell silent and looked around. That same soft pink dress was released, and Agatha chose snow-white shoes with a pink bow to go with it. When the couple came out, everyone couldn't take their eyes off them. Everyone was whispering that they were the perfect couple, and their outfits were matched, and it seemed like they were in perfect harmony. The ladies joyfully greeted the Marquis and Marchioness. They said that they had been waiting for them for a long time. They heard about the successful trade agreement that had been concluded, and that His Majesty was extremely pleased. Agatha smiled as she greeted the ladies. Agatha was told that high society was gossiping about nothing but the fact that she and the Marquis had chosen the dress together. Following their appearance, the minor son of the Roxbad Empire was announced. His Highness Crown Prince Anthony has arrived at the palace. The prince was bowed in greeting. The man said that he was glad to see everyone, but he first went to Agatha. He leaned towards her and smiled, teasing her that the whole capital was buzzing about how inseparable she and her husband were, and it looked like their honeymoon had been a success. The noble ladies quietly left, so as not to disturb Lady Agatha and His Highness's conversation. Nobilis asked with a smile, what about Anthony's place, why he was approaching her with such speeches. His Highness asked if he was an exception. Since he was still Roxbad's main womanizer, Agatha supported him, adding that a womanizer with so many mistresses appeared alone. Anthony told the Marquis that this was how his own cousin was tormenting him, to which Enoch replied that he saw that they had a truly strong family attachment. The three of them talked to each other for some time. Agatha asked what Anthony's occasion was today, and His Highness explained that since the imperial ball was a rare event, he had come to show everyone what a warm relationship he had with the only heiress of Nobilis and her husband. The girl noted that, as the only legitimate son of His Majesty, he knew how to speak, as always. Anthony glanced briefly somewhere into the hall. He said he had a feeling that something interesting was going to happen here. The Marquis paused and asked if they were talking about Duke Theodore Newt. The prince grinned, a little surprised that the Marquis knew about it. Covering her face with a fan, Agatha replied that how could one not know? They both knew. Today she felt someone's gaze sticking to her especially persistently. From the rest, Agatha could still tolerate this. But Theodore, for some reason, kept his eyes on her, and at that moment their gazes met. The heroine was nervous, because she had enough of Fernand, and now Theodore too. She was worried that Enoch would not understand anything wrong. Agatha decided that since she couldn't avoid the meeting, she'd better take advantage of this chance, so she asked her husband if she could call the Duke to see them for a minute. The man did not object, and a moment later Theodore was bowing, greeting His Highness the Crown Prince. Anthony was glad to see him, asked about his health and whether he had recovered already, to which the Duke replied that it was thanks to the care of His Majesty and His Highness. Agatha looked at Theodore all this time. She greeted him, which seemed to surprise him. The man pressed his hand to his chest and sincerely said that he was glad to see her again, the young Marquise Arata. The prince added that if he was not mistaken, the duke had some business with his cousin, and Theodore replied that he had words for the young marquise. Enoch's hand went around his wife's shoulder. The marquis asked if the duke would mind if he heard it too. Theodore nodded. He didn't mind. Tenderness and respect were visible in his eyes. He even said that if it didn't cause inconvenience to His Highness, he should stay. At that moment, Anthony felt a sense of pity for the Duke, who, after the divorce, was treating Agatha like this. It seemed he still cherished his ex-wife. Theodore Newt told the Marquis why they had divorced, and added that now that the Marquise Agatha was a stranger to him, he had no right to bring danger upon her. Looking away, the Duke asked that the fact of his visit be accepted as a kind of apology. He came to warn the young Marquise. Theodore said that some time ago, in the presence of his grandmother, mother, and sisters, a conversation about her arose. The Duke did not hear the details, but nothing good was in store for the Marquise. Therefore, Theodore warned Agatha to beware of his family and those aristocrats who were close to them. As he left, he wished her peace wherever they were. The man who always gave in to his own family has only now taken Agatha's side. How ironic. The girl closed her eyes, thinking that it was unlikely that Enoch would misunderstand her because of this. The Marquise leaned over to ask her if she was okay, and Agatha said yes. She was simply surprised that the Duke behaved a little strangely. If the Nuda ladies returned to society this fall, Agatha already knew in advance that things would not be quiet. She asked Enoch not to worry, as once the new season began, it would be resolved naturally. The trumpets rose solemnly and blared loudly into the air, greeting the son of the Empire, His Majesty the Emperor. Anthony turned around and said he had to go. Finally, the orchestra began to play, the violins and cellos lifting the consonant melody and spreading it throughout the hall. The Marquise and Marchioness danced. Agatha periodically glanced at her husband. He seemed to be doing well, but she was still worried whether he was hurt by what had happened to Theodore. Agatha asked Enoch directly if he was upset that Duke Newt had approached her, but the man believed there were good reasons for it. While dancing in a waltz, the heroine explained that after the divorce, she spoke to him for the first time, and that there were far fewer opportunities to cross paths than one might think, and the Marquis understood this perfectly well. He pulled Agatha's hand towards him, and placing his fingers on her shoulder blades, he said that there was still little that was pleasant about it. Agatha's heart started racing, her eyes widened. She wanted to know why Enoch was so upset. Is it because he has feelings for her, or because he is, albeit only by agreement, her husband? Blushing, Agatha pressed herself against Arata's shoulder. She wanted to believe that all these feelings were because he cared about her. His Majesty the Emperor raised his hand, asking Marquise Arata to come to him. Enoch noticed the Emperor's gesture and informed Agatha that he would be leaving for a short time. The man furtively lowered his gaze to his wife. On her bare, pale shoulders, looking so graceful in this pink fabric, no matter how you look at it, it gave him no peace. He took off his cloak and covered Agatha's back with it, saying that it was cool here, and his wife thanked him. So, with a less troubled soul, the Marquis approached the Emperor's table and bowed respectfully to him. Watching her husband and godfather from the side, the heroine wondered if it was even possible to leave for a short time. And indeed, the Emperor asked the Marquis what he was worth and let him sit down in the empty seat. Enoch tensed, realizing that the greeting would be drawn out. He answered His Majesty that it was an honor for him, and he looked at Agatha. The Marquise nodded with a smile on her face. She had no doubt that this would be so. Since the Emperor's beloved new Marquise has arrived, the Emperor, of course, will not let him go so easily. The girl turned around, guessing that Enoch would stay there for a long time, and it was time for her to take action slowly. The Marquis watched as Agatha walked across the hall in the opposite direction. He lifted the glass of wine to her lips, keeping his eyes on her until Agatha was out of sight. The heroine went to the room of the noble ladies, whom she had not seen for a long time, to discuss pressing issues. Covering her face with a fan, Agatha whispered to Madame Iris. Without taking her eyes off the interlocutors opposite her, the lady also answered her imperceptibly. The Marquise said that it seemed like they should take a closer look at Newt's house. Iris smiled, whispering that she didn't think they would sit idly by, and asked if it was worth checking out their close associates. Agatha assessed the situation. The battlefield would not be the court, but high society they certainly wouldn't want open war, so they wouldn't risk sending their closest henchman to stab her in the back. The Marchioness whispered to the lady that it was far more likely that they would use the families preparing for their debut in society this autumn and the neutral people with whom she connected them, and this was precisely Madame Iris's area of expertise. Agatha left it to her and, having finished her conversation with the ladies, went out into the hall, wondering if Enoch was still sitting with His Majesty. Indeed, the Marquis was sitting at the Emperor's table. The heroine watched as they talked about something, and a warm thought flashed through her mind that he was doing well. The man turned his head into the hall, feeling someone's gaze on him. Agatha gasped when she caught his gaze. She felt good about this feeling. The Marquis thought that just recently, Agatha had not even looked back and simply left, and now she was secretly watching him. He smiled at his wife, raising the glass to his lips. Their gazes were so focused on each other that Enoch did not notice how they approached him. It was a lady in a pink dress who bowed to the Marquis, holding her hem with white gloves. She asked shyly if he could spare her some time. She needed to talk to him. Arata's gaze instantly turned cold and stern. Agatha froze, watching this scene, so much so that she did not even hear the lady sitting next to her addressing her. The Marchioness smiled, quietly asking for forgiveness from Madame Kate. She asked for one favor. Lady Iris whispered to Agatha that the girl next to the Marquis was Lady Lucy, daughter of Count Lyras. She was once engaged to His Grace the Marquis, but after he was sent to the front, Count Lyras unilaterally announced the break in the engagement. Agatha folded her fan in her hands, adding that she was now appearing before her husband. She wondered why. Without taking her eyes off the Emperor's table, Agatha asked what would happen if she approached them. Now Iris quietly replied that many eyes were watching the Marquis. Rumors were inevitable. Was she ready for this? Agatha's gaze was intense, and she thought with firm confidence that she could survive a couple of gossips. Enoch told Lady Lucy to speak. The pink-haired girl rejoiced, expressing her gratitude to Milord Marquis. First of all, albeit belatedly, she wanted to congratulate him on his victory. She did not dare to come to him at the victory reception, but she was also amazed by his military merits. The Marquis thought that if Agatha saw this, it would be unpleasant for her. He looked into the hall, but his wife was not there. A cold sweat broke out in his blood at the terrible thought. He looked at the empty seat between the noble ladies, and a feeling of unease overcame him. Lucy was saying at this time that her father wanted to apologize for his previous rudeness, and was asking the Marquis to give him a little time when Agatha was going up the stairs. The lady, blushing with embarrassment, stammered that her father had told her to find out whether the Marquis would agree to give him some time. Agatha silently walked past her. Her graceful hand rested on her husband's shoulder. Agatha leaned slightly back in her chair, asking Enoch who this lady was. It seemed they had never met before.